the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And yeah, good afternoon. Welcome. Coming up on 3 minutes after 1 o'clock. Welcome to the home of common sense. Thank you to Julia. She's back tomorrow. So, Keir Starmer says England faces a never-ending fight for our flag, urging it to be wrenched out of the hands of those who sow division and incite hatred. That's in the wake of the Southport killings. We'll get a load of views on that. It is St George's Day, by the way. Of course, that question, what does it mean to be English? If you can answer that. And we'll take the perspective from right across the country as well. Details on the way. Meanwhile, Tory leader Kemi Badenoch has accused the Prime Minister of hiding after the Supreme Court ruled that trans women aren't legally women. She called Keir Starmer scared. You scaredy cat. That's as bad as it got. It was an open goal, and I think she slightly missed it. We'll investigate the details. And Chancellor Rachel Reeves has been warned she can't just blame Donald Trump's tariffs for the faltering economy, with the IMF saying domestic factors played the biggest role in their decision to slash our growth forecast. We'll have more on that story as well. Everything you need to know and all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. What does it mean to be English? As distinct from being British, by the way. There's obvious logic to the question. Is there a central identity? 0344 499 1000. Is it an identity? Is it a specific part of our backstory, our history, or even our current status? When you think of England, what does that conjure up? And by the way, I'm not asking these questions out of nowhere. This isn't some kind of advice from the therapist. Today is St George's Day. Although, as I was saying to Julia, it's sort of officially it's St George's Day, but they've slightly moved it this year to next Monday. Apparently there was a bit of a hullabaloo at the church, something to do with an Easter clash and celebrating saints too near the day that Christ is risen, etc. That's, I'm told, the reason. Anyway, back to the issue. What does it mean to be English? And you can look at all the obvious stuff: a full English breakfast, a stick of seaside rock, carry-on film type humour, a nice cup of tea, lots of rain, the Beatles, the Stones, Coldplay. I mean, the list could go on in that respect. The countryside, London town, Shakespeare, pub culture, fish and chips, Robin Hood, Manchester, roast dinners, Stonehenge, towns with weird names. Have you ever been to Pratt's Bottom, Netherwallop or Bitchfield? They all exist. You might snigger, by the way. It's good to say that. You might snigger at this. If we were doing this show in Australia, they've got a place called Tittybong. I'm not making it up. We could do a whole show on this. So back to the issue. We all have there's lots of cultural references about what it means to be English. I just listed what I think are the big ones. Anyone for tennis? You know, there's a bit of that. There's a sort of an English politeness, which I think is only in England, as distinct from anywhere else in Great Britain or Northern Ireland. But there's more to it. What does it mean to be... What is Englishness, and how does the region of England differ from our neighbours in Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland? How do those areas look at England or Englishness? I think the English get a bit of a torrid time. You know, you start waving a flag, as you know, Keir Starmer's proclaiming to have addressed this. We'll talk to a couple of voices on this in just a bit, but reclaiming the flag, I've heard that said I thought we kind of had reclaimed the flag years ago. And which flag would you rather wave, the St George's flag or the Union flag? The Union Jack, Union flag, depending on its status at the time. 0344 499 1000. What we don't do very well is celebrate St George's Day. I had a mate of mine, Rich, this morning, 7 a.m, sent me a text literally saying Happy St George's Day. Does it every year, feels very strongly about the English identity and all that it means. But what does it mean to you to be English, to have a sense of being English? What is that? For my money, I've always felt more British than English. And there's just an obvious reason for that. We're a country the size of a postage stamp. I don't really recognise us all as different countries. Scotland, England, Wales, etc. There's one country, right? It's the United Kingdom, basically. And so that's where we're at. That's who we are in that sense. So being British has a fuller sense to me. And I could give you, I think, a more robust and even, I think, tangible list of things when we start looking at our legal system. It might be a bit creaky from time to time. Sometimes it even breaks a bit. But broadly speaking, the sense of that, the sense of justice, our parliamentary system, the way we do business, again, not always perfect. We've seen over the years, particularly more recently, you know, lots of characters who've messed with the system a little bit. But on balance, if you go around the world, I've been to a lot of countries around the world, and I tend to think that when you look at all those salient areas, our health service, for example, isn't always perfect. When it works brilliantly, it is one of the best. So on balance, put us against, you know, most other countries. Britain, Great Britain, Northern Ireland, United Kingdom, however you wish to refer to it, we all know what we mean by this, has a greater sense in my head of who I am and where I'm from than England does, even though I'm about as English as, I don't know, you know, a Cornish pasty, a pasty pasty at that, for that matter. 0344 499 1000. But let's just look, it is St George's Day, so therefore let's look at being English as distinct from being British. What does it actually mean? And what is your perception, if you're in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, of the English? How does that kind of pan out? If you feel very proud of your Englishness, what's behind that pride? What is the kind of root to you having that feeling? We've got Chloe Dobbs back with us, political commentator, to look at all the big stories of the day. Happy St George's Day. Happy
St George's Day.
Do we ever, I thought you might have like St George's flag earrings in or something like that.
Oh no, I wasn't that organised enough, but that would have been a good idea.
Big tattoo on the side of the face or something like that.
Yeah, face paint, whole face covered.
Yeah, or permanent
Next time.
maybe.
Yeah, get it permanently tattooed.
Why not?
To show my dedication to the country.
Absolutely right. So you're English?
I am, yes.
Right, OK. I only asked that, I kind of knew that, but, you know, there might be a little kind of diversion in the family tree.
Yes, my mum is from America, so I'm half American. I'm a dual citizen, I'm afraid.
You've got the dual nationality.
I know. I end up
Two
sort
passports.
of going along with the 4th of July celebrations, even though in reality it's a middle finger up to the English. So that's
well, it is, really,
I enjoy
isn't it?
the fireworks and the fun.
Yeah. Boston, goodness me. So listen, let's have a listen to Keir Starmer here, because of course he's sort of waded into this. I don't know if it's because it's St George's Day, but a rallying cry to reclaim our flag for St George's Day. This is him calling for us to unite against division and hatred. Let's have a listen to the Prime Minister.
We should always fight for our flag. It's our flag, it's our history, our heritage, it's our values. So we should always fight for that flag. I recognise that people want to see a country that's secure in all aspects, secure borders, secure economy, and secure in terms of people's health and opportunities. That is part and parcel of what we are as a country. But there is this battle for the flag. There are some people who want to use it, you know, cause conflict, to use it as it was used in some of the riots last year. I don't think we should give up on our flag. We should reclaim it. It belongs not to me as Prime Minister, not to the government, not to the Labour Party, not to any political party. It belongs to all of us, and we should be proud of it.
I'm glad you clarified that the flag doesn't belong to the Labour Party, like anyone actually thought that. Oh, I thought that was the Labour Party flag.
Oh, it's got red on it.
It's got red. It must be the Labour Party flag. I mean, I don't know where he was really going with all of that.
It seemed like a lot of babble when he'd probably been briefed to say, look, we've got the local elections coming up, Reform are doing pretty well, we need to look a bit more patriotic. So I think he said some of the right things there, but I feel like everything he says these days I just take with a pinch of salt. And what he's saying there about, oh, we shouldn't be using the English flag to sow division and whatnot, I think the reality is that a lot of the time people, they start associating the English flag with, for example, protests for Tommy Robinson, when actually I just think, you know, you can argue with their point of view, the people who are on those marches, not the flag that they're wearing. And it's a shame that only those people are the people that have the confidence and the pride in their country to wear an English flag. It should be the case that people across the spectrum, left and right, happily will fly an English flag.
Because it wouldn't be the case with, I mean, if you walked past those kind of Britishness or Englishness, whether you call them protests or, you know, lots there was a couple last year. People sort of likened it to a kind of like a royal, official royal day of some sort. It felt very patriotic. It felt very nice, and people were sitting in deck chairs, and the sun was out. And that view, that image, I suppose Starmer's point is that it's kind of been tarnished. If you saw a load of people who were Irish or even Scottish in the same situation, thousands, you know, tourists would be taking photographs and going, wow, look, it's a celebration of St Patrick's Day. Isn't that brilliant? St George's Day, the flag, has it got different connotations, or are we just sort of projecting that onto it? Because it has, you know, to a degree been misused, but not specifically the English flag.
I think that certain individuals associate the English flag with certain connotations. Both the English flag and the British flag, you have, you know, some idiot lefties often saying, oh, it represents colonialism and our evil past.
Oh, for God's sake.
They're just focused on picking out any bad parts of the past rather than actually recognising, regardless of whether we made some mistakes as a country, this is a country to be proud of. We have a culture, and it's something that should be celebrated. I think it's just a great shame that we live in a country where so many, especially young people, just in the West in general, hate their own countries, when actually we're pretty great, I'd say.
I think we're all right. What does it mean, though, to be English, as distinct from being British, say, or in your case, half American? Pesky Yanks.
Well, I think it's always, whenever you fill out a form, it's like, oh, what am I looking for? Am I looking for England, UK, Great Britain? And there are so many, it's weird having so many different identities. And, you know, I feel like there's not really much difference between being English and being British. It just happens to exclude, for example, wearing a Scottish tartan kilt and whatnot. I think being English, it's one that's often is something that's quite hard to define, and that's where often, you know, journalists will try and catch out politicians like, aha, you can't give me a one-line answer to what being British means and what culture means. But it's lots of little things, like, for example, we're great at queuing, we're very polite, it's how we talk to each other, it's certain things we eat, whether, I know we don't have the best cuisine in the world, but, you know, fish and chips to me seems like a very British thing. You mentioned...
And a Sunday roast.
Sunday roast. You mentioned pasties, I know that's specific to Cornwall, but little things like this, I think, feels very English, and these are the kind of things you start to miss when you go abroad.
But also, if you get into, you know, we shouldn't dismiss cultural things. You know, I mentioned music, theatre, film, etc. I mean, we're pretty much up the Premier League at the top there, aren't we, in terms of what we've given the world? I know you could say Great Britain as well has done that in terms of inventions, but I mentioned Shakespeare as an obvious one. You know, bring in a Bronte or two if you want to. You know, we've done well in that world.
Yeah, and apparently, I can't remember who was saying, but there was this big hoo-ha maybe a month or so ago where apparently it's white supremacy, or European white supremacy, to claim that we have better art and culture in Britain than the rest of the world. So to celebrate Shakespeare is wrong. I think this was all with the drama over Shakespeare's birthplace. They now have been decided they need to downplay how good of a playwright Shakespeare was, because they don't want to make it sound like they're suggesting that our culture in Britain is better than that in other countries.
We've got to somehow apologise for Shakespeare.
I know, it's just, it is the West hating itself, and it's very sad to see, but I hope that today on St George's Day that a few people who were maybe doubting how great this country was can start to feel a little bit more patriotic again.
I hope so. What does it mean to be English? 0344 499 1000. Maybe our parliamentary system is part of it. It's not always perfect, but it does work rather well. Today, of course, PMQs, and a lot of a hullabaloo in the build-up to that. Kemi Badenoch urging Keir Starmer to essentially apologise to women after he shifted his stance on transgender rights following that Supreme Court ruling. Let's have a listen to the two of them battling it out at PMQs today.
He talks about my predecessor. What about the abuse I faced from his MPs calling me a transphobe for supporting what the Supreme Court has now clarified in his words? And where was he? He hid for 6 days without commenting on the Supreme Court judgment. Why did it take him so long to respond? Isn't it because he was scared?
Yes. Mr. Speaker, the only fiction here is the idea she delivered anything in office. She held the post of Minister for Women and Equalities for 2 years, and she did precisely nothing. She provided no clarity on the law, did nothing to improve women's lives, which got materially worse under her watch.
Well, I don't know where to start on that. I mean, he's got a point that the Tories did very little on this.
Well, the Tories did very little in, I think, most areas, but that's the easy cop-out answer for them. Is whenever they're challenged on something, is they just point the finger back and say, "Oh well, the Tories left us a mess. The Tories didn't do anything." This trans issue is very, very difficult for Keir Starmer to navigate, and his silence really spoke volumes, and the pressure started to get to him. You have to say something. You have to say something about this ruling, especially when you've got groups of Labour MPs plotting to not necessarily overturn the ruling, but do whatever they can to weave around it. You've had the Young Labour put out a big statement with all the Labour students saying how awful the Supreme Court ruling is. There's a lot of pressure on him, but he knows that there's big division within the Labour Party.
Huge.
Whatever side he picks, he's going to upset somebody. If he goes on the side of the trans activist, then he's seen as, you know, a misogynist that doesn't care about women's safety. But if he sides with the Supreme Court ruling, he's upsetting huge swathes of the woke part of the Labour Party that are furious. You saw the size of that pro-trans protest at the weekend in London. So he's stayed completely silent, not knowing what to do. But now he's had to face the music being challenged by Kemi Badenoch today, and he gave a pretty prophetic response, not standing up for Rosie Duffield, who has, you know, very sadly been bullied and treated awfully for believing in common sense.
But also, I mean, I thought it made him sound ridiculous, because he said, you know, well, now we've got a Supreme Court ruling. It's like, you needed a ruling to tell you this? I mean, the Supreme Court ruling merely confirmed what most sane people already knew. He's kind of implicit within his comments on that is that until we had the ruling, he still didn't know, which is why we've got all those interviews out there of him saying, well, we shouldn't say only women have a cervix, and I don't know what a penis is when it comes to work. I've got no idea about any of this stuff. And he was hesitant at best on all of that. And now his response is, thank God for the ruling.
Yeah, I mean,
in fact, the ruling should have just confirmed what you already thought.
And it might be the case that Keir Starmer, deep down, he knows what a woman is, and he knew this all along. But we know with Keir Starmer, he just goes whichever way the wind blows and says whatever he thinks is the right thing to say. And so all those interviews of him umming and ahhing about what a woman is, saying it's wrong to say only women can have a cervix, he may have just been putting on an act. I think that for both Keir Starmer and sporting governing bodies and whatnot, I think the Supreme Court ruling is probably a bit of a relief for them, because now they can, rather than saying this is my opinion of how trans people should be treated, they can say someone independent has said this isn't my opinion, I'm just going by what the law is. The reality is that Equality Act, you know, that was written in 2010, and it's only over the past few years that we've had these questions of what actually is a woman, what do we do with trans people. The world has really changed, and it didn't have that clarity in it of what a woman meant before. So I understand why we had a court judgment. I mean, it's ridiculous it had to go all the way to the Supreme Court, but here we are.
Here we are indeed. But is it over? We'll have more on that. More from Chloe in a couple of moments. Over to you as well. 0344 499 1000. What is it? St George's Day. So happy St George's Day and stuff. What does it actually mean to be English? How do you feel as an English person? How do you define that identity? Do you sense it in every fibre of your being, every sinew of your neurosystem? Does it scream, I'm English? How does it manifest for you, being English? If you're Scottish, Welsh, Irish, what is your perception of the... Do you feel a little bit sorry for the English because you can't really wave a flag like every other country around can without somebody attacking us? Keir Starmer says we need to reclaim the flag. Oh, great. Thanks, Keir. 0344 499 1000. Our lines are open. This is Talk.
competition's a good thing, and the Tories have had their chance. They had 14 years to turn the country around and make it grow again and great again, and they did the opposite. And so people won't forgive and they won't forget. That's why we're surging in the polls. That's why we are in almost every poll now ahead of the Tories, very often by more than the margin of error. And so we will just keep doing what we seem to be doing pretty well. And obviously we're looking forward to the results coming through on May the 2nd from all the various elections.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Chloe Dobbs is still with us, of course. We were just doing something very British or very English. In fact, we nearly had an argument about the weather. About the weather, for God's sake. Because it's raining today, certainly where we are, I think it's a bit of a dull day. But Easter was really nice and the sun was out, even though the weather forecast said it's going to be dull all weekend. It was actually sunny all weekend.
Exactly. What a surprise.
Pretty much excelled itself.
I know. I mean, often in this country we are disappointed when it says the weather's going to be nice and you end up having to take your umbrella out if you're lucky enough to remember one. And think, oh God, this is so English, it's raining all the time. But when we're pleasantly surprised with better weather than the weather forecast, always a win. Well, I'm glad you said forecast, because here's a different one. It's the economic forecast. The IMF, as we reported yesterday, has blamed domestic factors, not just global issues, as it's cut the UK's growth prediction to 1.1% and warned of the G7's highest inflation. Let's take a listen to when the OBR cut the UK's forecast last month.
The OBR have today revised down our growth forecast for 2025 from 2% in the autumn to 1% today. I am not satisfied with these numbers.
She's not satisfied with these numbers. Well, she's in charge of these numbers, for goodness sake. Didn't she used to be a top meteorologist?
Probably says it on her CV somewhere.
One of the two. Yeah, I think she ran the Weather Centre.
Yeah, probably something like that. A lot of people are making jokes now about how, according to her CV, she's probably next in line to be the next Pope.
Yes, I've seen some great memes on that. There's some lovely memes of her poped up with all the garb.
Yeah, but on a serious note, this is very embarrassing for Rachel Reeves that the supposed experts, I mean, whatever you think of the IMF, I think most people probably think they're a little bit more experienced than Rachel Reeves, to be honest. Now, blaming not entirely domestic factors, but saying it's more important than Trump tariffs. The Trump tariffs, yes, they are going to affect us to some extent, but they are suggesting that things like rising energy prices are to blame, as well as rising borrowing costs because of that autumn budget. Rachel Reeves, you know, she tried to come out with a more optimistic outlook in that spring statement, you know, essentially an emergency budget, and act more optimistic than she was in the autumn budget. But that optimism has very quickly been drained by the statement from the IMF, and she is really, really desperate to blame anybody but herself for the dismal economic outlook. Blame Trump, blame the Tories, blame the supposed 22 billion black hole. But now the IMF are kind of exposing her for being at least somewhat responsible. Also partly makes Ed Miliband look responsible if rising energy prices are also a driving factor.
Because she was almost dining out on the tariff thing, wasn't she? And saying, you know, well, it's nothing to do with us, you know, got these tariffs that, you know, well, they weren't there like 30 seconds before she said this, but she was suddenly suggesting that was the reason for any financial or economic woes. And then, well, now we hear this news that, it'll be a factor, but not the biggest factor. The biggest factor is you, Boomerang Rach, with your budget of doom.
Yeah, a budget of doom is a great way to describe it.
It will be known as that. We had the Omnishambles budget a few years ago, and now this is the budget of doom.
And you don't need to be that intelligent to recognise that doing a budget that raises taxes by 40 billion quid is going to drive rich people out of the country. it's going to reduce your chances of getting good foreign investment, of business thriving, and of course that's going to then end up in economic outlooks being brought down, growth figures, expectations being reduced. But I think she just doesn't get it. Why? She's not a business-minded person. She's been a public servant for most of her life, just like pretty much everyone else in the cabinet. They've got no idea what they're doing. You've got Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, another one who lied on his CV, by the way, claimed he was a solicitor when he wasn't. He hasn't really got any business experience, and he recently appointed a board of supposed experts to help him on his policy surrounding business. But again, none of them were really business people. They were all just a bunch of woke Ramonas.
Yeah.
So they've got no idea what they're doing.
No, none whatsoever. And the weirdest thing about Rachel Reeves is whatever her kind of iffy CV of suspicion tells us, was she an economist here, was she not? She did go to Oxford and she did study at the London School of Economics, and she has got a degree in that world. So you'd think, if nothing else, just from a basic perspective, she should know that what she's literally saying out of her own mouth is just complete gobbledygook. She knows how the economy works, even if she didn't actually run the world at one point.
I don't know what she believes. I don't know what is going on in her head. But the reality is, her policies, whether she believes in them or not, are just not very good at all. I don't know who is advising her, but I don't think that they are doing a very good job. As I said, she likes to blame anybody but herself, and I understand the Tories did leave them in a difficult position, but I don't think that can be blamed for everything. And 100%. I think Labour really restricted themselves about what they can do in their budgets by what they promised in the lead up in the general election. They've broken enough promises as it is, but their election promises were, acted as though money grows on trees, and they just promised to throw more money at everything. And slowly but surely, they're having to cut one thing after another. Said they wouldn't raise any taxes on working people. Look how much trouble that's caused them. Scrambling wherever they can to raise taxes somewhere else. She thought she could just do a big capital gains tax hike and that would sort the whole thing out. It all out. But then, the Treasury came back and said, well, we've run the numbers and a bunch of people are going to leave the country, so that's not going to raise you any money. And
the story ain't over yet, because, there's be another budget later in the year and she's got very little wiggle room other than breaking her own promises not to raise taxes. We'll watch with interest. Final one here, Chloe. Robert Jenrick, writing in the Telegraph, talking about this league table, if you like, of unfortunate league table of rates of crime from certain nationalities. He's the Shadow Justice Secretary now. Of course, he's revealed the Home Office is going to publish the crime data because he's been agitating for this for a long time, by nationality by the end of the year. He's highlighted preliminary data showing foreign nationals are more likely to be convicted of crimes than British citizens, with violent and sexual offences especially concerning. According to Mr. Jenrick, Algerians are 18 times more likely to be convicted of theft, Afghans and Eritreans 20 times more likely to face convictions for sexual offences compared to Brits. What do we do with this data?
I think that it tells us where we need to go with our immigration policy. I think that this data has been hidden from us for a long time. I think partly because the authorities think Brits don't deserve to know the truth, because what they'll do with it is, they'll become racist bigots if they hear this. But we do deserve to know the truth. And these figures, although they're shocking, they're not really any surprise to me, because I've seen the figures that have come out of other countries like Italy, which I think similarly said Afghans and Eritreans 18 times more likely to be convicted of sexual assault or rape. It is very, very clear that not all cultures are the same, and you can look at this data and say, okay, maybe there are certain countries that we should prioritise and deprioritise when we decide who's going to come in this country, without it insinuating that, for example, every Afghan is a rapist. Like whenever I talk about this and I make content on this, even if I've clarified that, you can clarify it 20 times. Some idiot will comment saying, "Oh, you're saying all Afghans are rapists." I'm not. So that is such a difficult.
No one would say that.
It's such a difficult thing to talk about. But 100%. I'm glad to hear that the Home Secretary has now got the guts to release this data. And
by the way, we publish data on all sorts of things in this country, with nationality specific. He was publishing one on, who are the most polite nationalities that live in the UK but not born in the UK. Nobody would be grumbling about that because, the French came out top. By the way, they never would on that one, but you take the point. Listen, Chloe, thank you. Always good to see you. Chloe Dobbs with us here on the programme. Over to you shortly as well. 0344 499 1000. That is where you'll find us. We're going to chat to John Denham in a couple of moments, former Secretary of State under the previous Labour government, and also Tom Hunt, former Conservative MP, who's always got a thing or two to say about patriotism and what goes with it. There's a lot to be said on that question of what does Englishness mean to you in your respect, in your own experience. How do you sense being English? What does it mean as far as you're concerned? Our lines are open. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It's always fascinated me, the question, what does it mean to be English? And you could apply that to any nationality around the world. It's always worth a little bit of nasal gazing and a bit of a debate and a powwow on what your national identity means. Of course, it comes around because it's St George's Day today, 23rd of April, although I think it's kind of been shifted somewhat, but I think in the minds of most, 23rd of April is when it really is. Keir Starmer has issued a St George's Day rallying cry, calling for unity in the never-ending fight for the flag, he says. Now, I thought he was speaking a kind of language of a different era when I heard him say. I know what he was referring to, of course. He hit out at those fuelling hatred after the Southport killings, accusing them of sowing division. Nigel Farage, of course, warns mass immigration eroding Britain's national identity and all the rest of it. We need to reclaim our flag. We're going to speak in a moment to Tom Hunt, the former Tory MP, and before that, John Denham, Director of the Centre for English Identity and Politics at the University of Southampton, and, of course, former Labour Cabinet Minister. Before we speak to you, John, and get your response on this. And good afternoon to you, by the way.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on.
I know you will have heard the words of the Prime Minister, but it's worth reminding ourselves one of the reasons we're talking about this. Let's listen to what Keir Starmer said on the Great Reclaim.
We should always fight for our flag. It's our flag, it's our history, our heritage, it's our values. So we should always fight for that flag. I recognise that people want to see a country that's secure in all aspects, secure borders, secure economy, and secure in terms of people's health and opportunities. That is part and parcel of what we are as a country. But there is this battle for the flag. There are some people who want to use it, cause conflicts, to use it as it was used in some of the riots last year, I don't think we should give up on our flag. We should reclaim it. It belongs not to me as Prime Minister, not to the government, not to the Labour Party, not to any political party. It belongs to all of us, and we should be proud of it.
There it is, John. It belongs to all of us. We should be proud of it. But what do you think the Prime Minister is trying to reclaim it? I mean, I genuinely was a little confused about the amount of weight that he attached to that reclaim point.
I'm not entirely sure. It doesn't really make a great deal of sense to me, and I think it could be counterproductive. So start with two things. 8 out of 10 people who live in England say they're strongly English, right? I think if you start suggesting that if you say you're English, you are in some way sort of associated with the far right or racist, it's going to be, it's not going to appeal to people in the way that Keir Starmer might like. Of course, there's a positive case to be made for Englishness, but I think this language rather implies that the far right do own the flag, and we've got to get it back. That's not the case. And the second thing, very quickly, look back at the photos of the riots last summer. You will see as many Union flags, the Union Jack, flying as you will see the St George crosses. Yeah. So in other words, racists go out and wave both flags. We never hear anybody saying we've got to reclaim the Union flag. So I think it's in danger of tarring English identity with something that it doesn't belong.
Yeah. Is it an argument, though, that seems to have gone on forever? It's not certainly not the first time I've debated it, that, we often talk at length about how, St Patrick's Day very much celebrated even outside of Ireland. If you go around big cities in England, you'll find lots of pubs doing a St Patrick's Day event in the evening. But we've never really bought into it, the St George's Day thing, in the same way. Do you think that's because of a history of the hijacking of our identity, or is it just not in us to go for, we do like a party and we certainly like a pub, but for some reason we can't seem to marry the two up?
I think it's largely the latter. And I think it's also true that historically, England was the nation at the heart of the Union, at the heart of a great big empire. And at the times when other nationalities were celebrating their national identities, in some ways there's a resistance to this idea of being part of this big English run thing. The English never really developed the habit of having a big national day of celebration. I don't think it's about the idea of Englishness being captured. And if you look historically, Ian, back in the 1930s, Oswald Mosley's fascists were the British Union of Fascists. Yeah. And after that, you had the National Front, the British Movement, the BNP, Britain First. The far right overwhelmingly is British nationalist, not English nationalist. So I just think we need to move on from all of this. Agreed. We need to say, firstly, 8 out of 10 people say they're English. Secondly, 90% of people in England don't think you have to be white to be English. 80% of people in England think that if you're born in England, that entitles you to be English. Talk about the positives of an inclusive idea of England.
Yeah. I wrote a little list at the beginning of the programme. You would have missed this bit. These are mostly cultural reference. What does it mean to be English? And it was all the obvious stuff: full English breakfast, stick of seaside rock, carry-on film type humour, a nice cup of tea, lots of rain, the countryside, Shakespeare, pub culture, fish and chips, Robin Hood, Manchester, roast dinner, Stonehenge, towns with weird names. And I went through this whole list. Now, that's great and a lot of fun to do. Yeah. But there's much more to us English people than just the cultural references.
Yeah, they are. And they're with a small p, they're quite political. Do you think of England as a nation? Yes, we're part of Britain, but we're not the same as Britain. We have borders, we have towns, villages and cities that are English. Do you think that England has a history that is important? Whether or not you think that history is something you can always be proud of or not, our history has made us and all the people living here who we are. So our history matters. Do you have a sense of the people of England changing over the generations as new people come here, but nonetheless the sense that there's a people of England? If you do those things, it's a nation. It has its own interests, to some extent at least, separate from those of the UK. It's got its history, it's got its people. That's what makes you English. And if you say, well, I don't think England really exists, I think it's just the same as Britain, I'm not interested in the history and I don't care about the people, you're probably not English.
Yeah. That's an interesting way to divide it up. How do you feel yourself, John? I mean, you've served in government. You served under a Scottish leader, of course, yeah. Which is fine. But and now you moved on to a different part of your career. I think you're Devon born and bred, aren't you? I know the Southwest often have arguments about being a completely separate area. Certainly Cornwall do.
Cornwall, mate. Devon's different.
I know Devon is different, and it's lovely as well.
One of the really interesting things about people who say they're English is that they often, as well as saying they're English, they'll usually say they're British too, but they often have an identity with a particular part of England. Okay, so somebody from Yorkshire will be English, but they'll say, "Look, I'm Yorkshire." Me, I'm from Devon, and I've lived my entire life within a few miles of the south coast. My Englishness is also tied up with the southern and southwest England that I come from. They're not competing with each other. It's just part of my makeup. As for me personally, I usually describe myself as more English than British, but I'm both. I want England to be recognised as a nation, but I want the Union to continue and prosper, and I want England to have a clear sense of national government. So that's where I stand. That's why I went to a university after I left the House of Commons to think and write and research about these issues, because I think they're important.
Yeah, I tell you what, that's a far more fulfilling day job than the previous one, isn't it, John? Who'd want that today?
It's better than opposition, that's
That's a very good point. Listen, great to have you on again, John. Thank you. John Denham, Director of the Centre for English Identity and Politics, University of Southampton. He's also a former Cabinet Minister under the Gordon Brown government. Let's get a word from Tom Hunt, former Conservative MP. Good afternoon to you, Tom. I thought John Denham's point was really quite bang on in lots of areas, and slightly surprised given that he's a Labour man and not a Tory man, but he seemed very honest about his assessment about being English. Do you share that?
Yeah, it was quite surprising to hear how much common sense he had to say, actually. And there was a lot I could agree with. But look, I don't think that we do enough to celebrate St George's Day. You know, I've long said that I think that it should be a bank holiday. I think that could easily happen. I think there's many other bank holidays across the year that we could get rid of one bank holiday somewhere else in the year and make our national day a bank holiday. I've long felt that. There's other things I think that we could do to make more of our national English identity. You know, I'm a big rugby fan, you know, and I watch Six Nations every year. And of course, Scotland play Flower of Scotland. The Welsh have got their national anthem. Ireland have got their national anthem as well. So I would like, actually, for our English national side, whether it's in football or rugby, to have an English anthem that is sung. You know, so I'd quite like to see the England rugby team singing Jerusalem or I Vow to Be My Country. Clearly, Team GB at the Olympics, you know, they'd have the God Save the King as the sort of GB national anthem. So, you know, those are two things I think we could do to make more of our national identity and to celebrate being English.
What do you think of Keir Starmer's comments about reclaiming the flag, Tom? I was slightly... I didn't, as I said to John Denham, I'm not quite sure why he went down that road, other than the fact there's some elections coming in a couple of weeks and maybe he was trying to shore up a bit of patriotism. Perhaps it was that. But I thought he made quite a lot out of this reclaim the flag thing. Does it need reclaiming?
Oh no, I don't think it does. I mean, you know, is it? I'm not really quite sure what he meant by that. You know, is it the case that some people who hold pretty unpleasant views, occasionally might some of those people be waving an English flag potentially, but it doesn't mean I think there's a big problem with the English flag being possessed by unpleasant people. I think on the whole, most of us identify with the English flag. I don't know what he's talking about. I also think he's being disingenuous. I think when you look at Keir Starmer's, he's probably said what he said today because somebody's told him to say it. Some bright spark in Number 10 has probably said, you know, we've got a bit of a problem with reform. The patriotic working classes are abandoning the Labour Party in droves. Wouldn't it be helpful, Prime Minister, if you read this script, make it that you're proud to be English? That would be a good political thing to do. That's what it sounded like. You know, do I honestly, for 1 minute, believe that Keir Starmer, as our Prime Minister, is really proud to be English in the sense that I'm proud to be English and you're probably proud to be English? I don't think so. And what annoys me is, you know, what is Keir Starmer doing to ensure that school children, for example, are taught about why our country is a great country, about all the things we've done in our history that make you and I proud to be English? What's Keir Starmer doing to promote that in the school curriculum? The answer to that question is absolutely nothing. I keep on hearing about how we need to teach more about global history and black history, etc., in things like the history curriculum, the school curriculum. I don't want that stuff to be promoted. What I want to be promoted in schools and in our history curriculum is English history. What makes our country special? What are the things that we should be proud of? Our role in ending slavery, the decisive role that we made in standing up to Nazi Germany, for example, the export of the English language, the huge outside influence that we have as a country across the world. Those are some of the things why I'm proud to be English. And I think it's very, very noticeable and telling that those things are not promoted enough, in my view, in our schools and in our curriculum. So I don't think Keir Starmer is proud to be English in the way that I am. And a lot of people on the left, they'll say, oh, we've got to teach British values or English values in the school. But what they actually mean by that is a kind of bland, liberal globalist set of values. They don't mean what I would deem to be core English values. So I'm not happy that Keir Starmer is our Prime Minister this St George's Day, as you can probably tell.
There it is. Listen, thorough stuff as ever. Tom, thank you. Tom Hunt, former Conservative MP, before that John Dennon, former Labour MP, both pretty much on the same page on this one. What does it mean to you, being English? What is Englishness? And your perception, if you're not English, of the English as well. We'll take some of that too. 0344 499 1000.
Competition's a good thing, and the Tories have had their chance. They had 14 years to turn the country around and make it grow again and great again, and they did the opposite. And so people won't forgive and they won't forget. That's why we're surging in the polls. That's why we are in almost every poll now ahead of the Tories, very often by more than the margin of error. And so we will just keep doing what we seem to be doing pretty well. And obviously we're looking forward to the results coming through on May the 2nd from all the various elections.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This one in from Fabrice, who says, I'm half Italian, half French and 100% English. My parents ensure we integrated with British society, and I considered the country's history, traditions and values my own. I support England in all sports. I'm proud to have served this country as a soldier and a police officer. Being English is to share the values that have made this country such a great beacon of democracy, fairness and tolerance. I get incredibly angry with migrants who refuse to integrate and or are offended by by aspects of our national identity. I could say a lot more. Happy St George's Day, and to you, Fabrice. Thank you for that. And do you know what? I think the point that you made there about our sense of tolerance, I think one of the reasons a lot of people at the moment feel agitated, upset, and now angry about the direction of our country, what is happening on the English Channel every day. Various other stories around grooming gangs is an obvious one. What the reason why ever been that country of tolerance, who've welcomed other nationalities, who've always had the door open for those that have been exposed to, horrendous abuses around the world in a variety of forms over many, many years. And I suppose because that's always been within us, we'll stick our hand in our pocket for whether it's children in need or a flood in Asia. We do that, and we do that stuff, and we do it well. And there is a sense now, it's like, hang on a second, sorry, what's going on here? We're not recognising this. This isn't about testing our tolerance. This is an abuse of our system. A lot of people are feeling that, and it's a very tangible feeling, and it's also a really understandable one. It's one that Keir Starmer and the likes of Angela Rayner simply would never in their lives understand. It's just a feeling they wouldn't get. They wouldn't. Their brain couldn't even get into that gear. They would assume it's sort of some invented guff from agitators on the right, rather than a genuine, real sense of injustice, having been a people of absolute supreme tolerance forever. Robert is down in London. How you doing, Robert?
Hello, mate. You well?
I'm good as gold.
Yeah, I'm coming at this question of what it is to be English.
Yeah.
I was born here, lived most of my life here, but I also have Caribbean heritage and tiny bit of Italian, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So your last caller there saying he supports English football team, I have resolved recently to invoke the 1/8 Italian clause during the World Cup. That's what I'll be doing.
Well, is that because of a greater chance of winning?
I've just had enough of England in the World Cup.
Well, we got pretty close in the last one.
I know, but we did have some luck on the draws, let's be honest.
But you have, I know because we've spoken many times before,
Yeah.
you've campaigned very much on English issues as well.
Very much. Well, I remember speaking to you before the Brexit vote.
Yeah.
I helped out with UKIP to get that vote delivered. When I say I speak with the hindsight, or the benefit of, I call it a benefit, I think, of seeing it from how other people live in the world and how they look at us. My Caribbean relatives, I mean, they were very surprised during the coronation because they all watch it and they've all been to London and they were like, where are the white people who, I thought you had white people running your country. This is what they were texting me on WhatsApp.
So this is other people who would be black, not even mixed race?
Yeah. No, they're not even mixed race. They're black people. They were texting me saying, there's a whole mixture because in the Caribbean you had a lot of, the mulatto thing. So it's lots of interbreeding or whatever. I don't know what the right and that's the thing. This is why I'm annoyed. That I don't even know what language I can use anymore. But I called in because over the years in work, we've had to talk to lawyers and things like that. And I think that the greatest characteristic of this country, and I'm talking on the whole, I'm talking about the intelligentsia that came up with common law, which is our greatest export. Common law is the basis of English law. English law is the basis of most international trade. And the reason why everyone wants to adopt and use those contracts, right, is because they're fair, okay? Investors and asset owners or borrowers and lenders instantly see the inbuilt self-governing sensibilities of common law contracts. Everyone's protected because it's fair. It looks at a situation and says, how is it going to be proper for both parties who are going to entreat, going to sign the contract? And that, if you really think, and it is our greatest export. It's not a tangible one. You can't put a dollar figure on it.
Of course. Do you think as well, in addition to that, Robert, because I agree with you 100%, do you think perhaps this is wearing off a bit now, but for a long, long time we were very much defined, a long time in recent years, recent history I should say, we were defined by the war. I'm thinking World War II in particular, and what happened, and that sense of purpose, that sense of collectivism, that sense of identity, that sense of justice. That, you know, for 5 years, it's hard to remember, you know, our grandparents were bombed on a daily basis. I mean, it's hard to think of it like that. 5 long years, but slightly more. And we came out of that, and the bad guy, the really bad guy, lost. And we were victorious along with allies in that. But it left a legacy of, you know, a sense, a direction of what justice looks like, what a sense of rightness looks like. And I know that's not just English, by the way, but you take the point.
I agree with that. You're talking to someone who I left home at 15 and went to live with my English grandmother who, I mean, she remembered bits of the First World War as a young child, right? So I lived with her in the 80s. She obviously remembered the Second World War, and she told me, you know, when you live with someone, you get to hear the stories over the years.
Yeah.
It was a fascinating time, and I wish actually our schools, because it was a positivity. It's not the negativity of it all, but in a weird way. And my mother's, my wife's mother as well, talked to me how, I remember her saying to me, life was easier during the Second World War than it is today for children and teenagers, because it was very clear what your responsibilities were, right? And that was to defeat Hitler. Now, can I just say, this sense of fairness, and so doing the right thing, that comes from the heart. That's the fairness that goes beyond the brain.
Yeah.
But I'll give you an example, right, of something. And
We've only got 30 seconds, Robert.
You're working, when you're with other people from other countries. I used to work in an elite derivatives unit in an investment bank, and I worked with some of the most educated people in the world on financial mathematics, right?
Yeah.
And these French people, they're French all over their maths. These French guys would openly talk on the trading floor and say, I was in the post office, this is in London, I was in the post office the other day, and there was a single queue that formed and then split into three at the counters, and there was no signs, no indication, no direction. And that's what...
So, you see, queuing is in the DNA as well. I love it. Robert, you've been brilliant as ever. Thank you. Robert down in London. Lines are still open. Don't go if you're hanging on. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. 3 minutes, or coming up on 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Welcome back to the home of common sense. So Keir Starmer says England faces a never-ending fight for our flag. Are you feeling that? Urging it to be wrenched out of the hands of those who sow division and incite hatred. I'm not sure most people sense that as being a thing very much. I mean, it's clearly hijackers out there. What does it mean to be English? It's St George's Day. We're asking that question. Our lines are open. Meanwhile, Tory leader Kemi Badenoch has accused the Prime Minister of hiding after the Supreme Court ruled that trans women aren't legally women, claiming he doesn't have the balls to express his views on gender. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. And Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood has ordered a review into two-tier bail rules, prioritising ethnic minority suspects, vowing to ensure that equality before the law is never a principle that is compromised, because there's some really weird, wacky stuff going on over there at the rule-making HQ. More on that to come as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Curtis says, "Hi, Graham." I don't know who Graham is either. To me, being English means getting up early, grafting hard all week to put food on the table and support my family. It's about having pride in working long hours, rain or shine, and still finding time for what matters, whether that's a kickabout with the kids, meeting mates down the pub, or cheering on our team at weekends. It's all the small things, a full English on a Sunday, a pint with your dad, proper banter with your mates. That makes up the backbone of English life. But I've got to be honest, more and more, I feel like our culture, our values, even our way of life are slowly being pushed aside. As an Englishman, I just don't want to see what we've always known. I just don't want to see what we've always known and lived be erased. That's a fair point as well. Let's get a word from another proud Englishman. Kevin Schofield is the political editor at HuffPost UK. Oh, there's low blows and there's low blows, Kevin, isn't there?
I've never been so insulted.
Absolutely right. But it is interesting. I mean, just on that point, that like St Andrew's Day or patriotism does have a different... I mean, I think the Irish do it, you know, if we're talking about places in our vicinity. Yeah. The Irish do it brilliantly. You can go to a pub in Edinburgh or a pub in London and see St Patrick's Day celebrated. Yeah. You wouldn't really... You don't get St George's Day celebrated here. You definitely wouldn't get it in Edinburgh or certainly not Glasgow. But you can have a St Andrew's Day celebration. But it's, again, not as big as St Patrick's, but there is a sense that the Brits have, despite lots of those other countries thinking that the Brits have a sort of superiority complex, in fact, it's almost the very opposite, because we don't go out and celebrate, even though we have, you know, as the last texter said, you know, some reasonable sense of belonging and culture and history.
Absolutely. There's nothing at all wrong with any of that, and being proud of where you're from and having, you know, being patriotic. But you're right, I think at times we can be a little bit embarrassed about, you know, you're almost like apologising for having a flag, for instance. We are just, I think you're right, the Irish do it better than we do, but there's almost like a sort of uncomfortableness about having, you know, a flag on display. We're just not that type of country. Like America, you know, you see it, they have the flag poles outside their house and the flags everywhere, and it's just no one bats an eyelid. Whereas here, it's like, well, that's a bit strange because not many people do it. And I don't know why that is. I'm stumped as to think why not, because it's not as if you should be embarrassed. I mean, what the gentleman that called you Graham said there, all those things, I mean, even as a Scotsman, I can relate to, you know, a pint with your dad, banter with your mates, you know, a fry up, supporting your team at the weekend, going to your work, playing with the kids. I mean, they're pretty universal things that we all do. It's not a peculiarly English thing, and there's nothing there to be embarrassed about.
It's weird, isn't it? My mate lives around the corner from me, Millwall Rich, he should be known, and he is not only, he said like, it took a lot of boxes here, that a lot of people, he's got a shaven head, he supports Millwall, and he does put a flag up, and so last election he was putting his St George's flag up on the, he was having some work done on the house on the scaffolding, and as he looked down, Laura Trott was standing there with some leaflets in her hand.
What are the odds?
And he said, she looked at me like someone who clearly thought she'd come to the wrong house. And he said, he just looked down and went, "All right, Laura, how's it going?" And she suddenly thought, oh, he's a nice guy. And, you know, sat there, had a bit of a chat, and he's not what his perception gives off. He flies the flag Yeah. Well, he sent me a text this morning, Happy St George's Day. Does it all the time. He's very, very proud of it. Yeah. And he doesn't care what the critics might think about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's no reason why he shouldn't. Do you remember when Emily Thornberry got herself in an awful lot of hot water?
Rochester.
It was Rochester by-election.
That's right.
And she posted this picture on Twitter of a house with St George's flag outside. And it was obvious, she denied it, but it was pretty obvious what she was getting at. I was like, oh, this looks a little bit...
She just wrote Rochester, didn't she?
Yeah, it was something like an image from Rochester or something like that. It's like,
right.
why? And it caused a huge furore.
What made it do that, by the way?
It was weird.
It
was never properly explained.
No.
But I think you could surmise what she was getting at, and it was just it played into this stereotype that a lot of politicians, and interesting you see Laura Trott, who's a Tory, so it's not necessarily just a Labour thing, but a lot, certainly on the left, I think, are a little bit uncomfortable when they start to talk about nationalism, patriotism, and that's why you've got Keir Starmer almost going out of his way today.
Is he electioneering?
Oh, definitely. This is coming just a week before the local elections. Reform are going to do very well. Labour aren't. They're probably thinking, well, that a lot of Reform voters and former Labour voters, traditional white working class, will feel a lot of pride in St George's Day, and we don't want them to think that Labour's not the party for them, so they've got to kind of overcompensate almost for it.
The other big dominating factor, of course, today, and it was the dominating point at PMQs, Kemi Badenoch demanding an apology from Keir Starmer to women after he finally admitted that trans women aren't women.
Yeah.
So this was a reasonable day for Badenoch.
Very good day. I thought she was clearly very comfortable in what she was talking about, and this is something that, it's not as if she's jumped on a passing bandwagon. She's been very consistent on her views on trans issues, right? Going back to when she was in government, obviously. So she was in pretty strong territory, whereas, as you just said, Keir Starmer has blown with the wind a little bit on this one, and he was already shifting. He had shifted his position from 5 years ago when he would say a trans woman is a woman, and he fell out with Rosie Duffield, the Labour MP, who said that a woman needs to have a cervix and all this type of stuff. And then he shifted a little bit, but obviously the Supreme Court ruling has now allowed him to come out and say, well, this has provided clarity. A woman is an adult human female, which he would never have said that 3 or 4 years ago.
But does that... See, to me, I don't think he gets any house points for that, because what he's saying is he needed a Supreme Court ruling...
Absolutely.
...to tell him that.
It got him off the hook.
It got him off the hook.
Yeah,
He's really only deferring to the legal definition now, rather than what he personally thinks. So a lot of people now still look at him and go, he doesn't really think that. He's just deferring to this court thing.
No, absolutely. And it's now given them cover to be able to... say what they're saying now. But again, for a guy who has got a reputation for U-turning and saying one thing when he's trying to get your vote and then saying something completely different or doing something different afterwards, it's not a great look again. And I think she really did punch that bruise. All 6 questions, all on the trans issue. And he had obviously prepared lines to come back with. 1 or 2 landed reasonably well, but it was definitely Kemi Badenoch's day today.
He hasn't apologised to Rosie Duffield. She still sits as an independent. She's the Canterbury MP, nicked the seat from the Tory. Julian Brazier, do you remember him?
Wow.
Who was I was oddly thinking about him this morning for some reason. I think possibly I was listening to Rosie Duffield being interviewed, and I remember when she, obviously being from that neck of the woods, it was my patch, so she hoovered up the seat from the Tories, who'd had it forever. And now she's an independent because of this. Now, would this not be a great chance for Starmer to go, look, Rosie, you went through terrible things, and boy, when you really read some of the stuff she went through.
Oh, it's terrible.
And some of those that sit very much in prominent positions on the front benches, who were back then, before they were in government, arguing, get rid of this woman, Rosie Duffield. Get rid of her. She's poison, she's toxic, she's a transphobe, probably an old white racist and a white supremacist as well. She had all sorts of terrible things said about her. Can Starmer not do that now? Is it too late in the day for him to apologise?
All things being equal, it would be a nice gesture if he did, but I think too much water has run under the bridge since then. Even since she quit, when she resigned as a Labour MP, it wasn't just on trans. Her letter was, all sorts of things. There's obviously an awful lot of bad blood between them, and I don't really think that she'd be interested in an apology from him now. In fact, there was a moment watching it on the TV. The parliamentary people, the director, obviously in charge of the images, cut to her at that moment,
which is not normally allowed.
No, it's not normally allowed to get a reaction shot, and the look, I mean, if looks could kill, the look on her face as she's looking at Keir Starmer as he's speaking was a picture. So I think even if he was to knock on her door and say...
Yeah, I clocked that, and I wondered if that would be picked up.
Yeah, let's just let bygones be bygones. I just don't see that.
And she's done what? It's her third term when she came in?
Yeah, that's right. I think there was that many elections.
I know, we've had quite a few, haven't we?
Maybe 2017 she was elected, maybe in 2019 re-elected, in 2020.
Possibly, or was she in before then?
25. I can't remember now.
How long has Rosie Duffield been in? Adam will tell us in half a second because he's got a diligent brain like that.
Yeah.
But either way, she might just go, I'll serve this out as an independent and then I won't stand again. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one, though, for independents. It's really tough without that party machinery behind you. And just the numbers of people who go out and knock on doors for you and put leaflets through doors, it's very difficult. But not impossible. You know, if you're a popular local candidate, a local MP, then it absolutely can be done. It just makes it much more difficult if you don't have that party apparatus.
Nearly 8 years, Rosie Duffield's been an MP, so that would have been 2017.
Yeah. So, she's been around for a while.
Ministry of Justice says probation officers must consider the trauma of ethnic minority criminals before they are sentenced. Now, this is really interesting. This is not to do with the previous guidelines of, consider the ethnicity or the gender of somebody when sentencing. This is essentially about, I don't know, I mean, Robert Jenrick has vowed to sort of, get behind this. I'm not absolutely sure how you could reasonably do this. I mean, what sort of, when he says the trauma of ethnic minorities, is he saying that if a young black kid is in the dock, then the judge has got to consider the slave trade or something? Is that...
It's very odd. I mean, there's clearly an issue, I think, with a disproportionate number of people from ethnic minorities being jailed, and that is something I think that politicians should be looking at to see what underlying reasons there may be for that. But the problem you have when you start bringing in these other sort of guidelines, shoehorning it in, it causes a backlash, and it causes a political row. So something that was maybe well-intentioned to begin with, if attempts to try and redress the balance are applied clumsily, then it can backfire and be counterproductive, and that's why then you end up with a Labour government trying to almost overcompensate by saying, no, there's no such thing as two-tier justice, and it's a very difficult issue, but it's a strange one, that.
The other thing that Jenrick has been talking about is this uniting the Conservatives and Reform UK. I mean, that can take many different forms, whether it's actually a party that gets together, whether it's about an agreement to not stand in certain obvious seats where one or the other is going to win. I mean, Jenrick obviously still wants to be leader of the Conservative Party. I would suggest he's got perhaps every chance of realising that.
And he's not making any secret of that.
I don't know whether he is I don't know whether he has that personality to... I mean, the language he speaks is very popular with a lot of Reform voters.
Yes.
But I don't know whether... You've got to go much further than that. Politics is about more than that, isn't it? You've got to be that character. You've got to have that certain X factor that's going to ignite the room in households that don't necessarily vote ordinarily Conservative. They've got to go, wow, this guy's good.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people would look at Jenrick and go, this guy's quite dull.
Yes, and I think British voters have got quite a good detector for someone who's maybe trying just a little bit too hard, because he has gone from being a sort of moderate in the party to being firmly on the right. He's obviously lost a lot of weight. He's sharpened up his image, his haircut. The stuff he puts on social media is high production values. He's obviously, whoever it is spending an awful lot of money making him look as good as possible.
Sure.
So he's clearly ultra ambitious. When you look at the quotes that he said, though, I mean, a lot of it is quite common sense. He's basically saying, look, if you've got Reform and Tories at each other's throat, dividing the right vote in politics, then Starmer will come through the middle. That's obvious. So what he's saying is we should try and unite. Now, he mentions coalition, which is an unfortunate word. I don't think he probably means a formal coalition between Reform and the Tories, but I think he wants to kill Reform, I think is what he wants to do. Reform want to kill the Tories. There's going to have to be some sort of accommodation made at some point. Or one of them's going to have to kill the other. Something's going to have to happen.
Yeah, he said he's working to ensure Reform UK does not become a permanent fixture in British politics. Now, if you're Nigel Farage or Richard Tyson, you're listening to this, they'll go, yep, we know Bob's got to say this. That's exactly what you have to say at this stage, because and Reform would say the same thing. We're not here for any pacts. I mean, I would say it's pretty much a dead cert there's going to be something. There's got to be.
There has to be.
Because they could win as a... I mean, there's all these polls say Reform will win on their own. I mean, that's a high-risk strategy.
Oh, yeah.
You'd be much safer if you were in bed together.
Well, even that poll at the weekend, which had Reform as the largest party, I think they had like 180 seats they would get. The Tories would have 165, the same as Labour.
Yeah.
But you had them together, I mean, the Tory seats and the Reform seats, you've got 350 seats. So clearly it would be better from a right of centre point of view if there was one party there that was united. But as I say, there's so much bad blood again between Farage and a lot of Tories, and also they've got to be careful as well. There's that sort of Lib Dem vote there. A lot of them are quite maybe soft Tories, maybe, you know, who would vote for a moderate Tory party. Are they going to want to vote for a Farage-led party of whatever description, or a Jenrick-led party which is firmly on the right? I don't know, so it's a tricky one.
It is a tricky one. Listen, we are out of time, Kevin. Always good to see you. Kevin Schofield is political editor at HuffPost UK. Thank you to him. Over to you in a couple of moments as well. 0344 499 1000. We'll go back to anything we've talked about. You can chip in on all of the above. That's how we roll here. And that question, what does it mean to be English? We asked this question, of course, on St George's Day. And if you're not English, what is your perception of the aforementioned? Our lines are open. This is Talk.
Competition's a good thing, and the Tories have had their chance. They had 14 years to turn the country around and make it grow again and great again, and they did the opposite. And so people won't forgive and they won't forget. That's why we're surging in the polls. That's why we are in almost every poll now ahead of the Tories, very often by more than the margin of error. And so we will just keep doing what we seem to be doing pretty well. And obviously we're looking forward to the results coming through on May the 2nd from all the various elections.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. This one from Teresa, who says, Happy St George's Day, Ian. I'm Polish born, but have lived here longer than in Poland. I've always regarded myself as an ambassador of my country, and it was and still is a privilege to live here. When I see some of the young dinghy divers blatantly abusing the generosity of Britain, my heart bleeds and my blood boils. Yeah, there is that real sense, isn't there? I bumped into a woman the other day who I only know because she used to work in Costa. And I hadn't seen her for ages, and I was just walking I was walking back from the garage, and walking back, and she was crossing the road, and we had a bit of a chat. She's Romanian, very, very proud to be in this country. Exactly the kind of person that, you know, if you open your borders to others in the same way that you'd like to think it will be reciprocated the other way around. Very, very patriotic to Britain and in England and where she lives. Loves the place, culture, history, all of it, and is devastated by what is happening, just exactly as Teresa just said there, for exactly the same reasons. 0344 499 1000. And this from Andy in Morecambe, who says, do you think if it wasn't for Guinness, who promote St Patrick's Day the way they do, would it be as big? The Scots have a wee dram. What do us English have? A pint of bitter or afternoon tea with a cucumber sarnie and a scone? Or is it a scone? Great show, says Andy in Morecambe. Yeah, I think that's a very good point about Guinness. I mean, it's largely almost a global sponsorship, because the best advertising Guinness get on an annual basis, probably by far more effective than anything they officially spend, which I'm sure goes into millions. Peter's in Dorset. Peter, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon. Just as feeling English and seeing England as it is, if you've seen the wonderful work the farmers do from the air on this country, it looks like an agricultural version of the Chelsea Flower Show. There isn't a country like it. And if you come down onto planet Earth again and you decide to go down the hedgerows and visit the pubs and the village greens, there's no other country like it. Whether we're playing sport at Wembley, Twickenham, Lords and Wimbledon, or whatever we're doing. But the biggest, most poignant situation I find each year is when Elgar is played at the Cenotaph, Nimrod. And it shows and it tells us about the fairness of the people of this country who went to war to give all those other nations around their sovereignty and their identity back to be their own bosses, their own fair play merchants. And it is quite extraordinary today, of all days, St George's Day, to have the man who stood at the Cenotaph as Prime Minister standing there with the deceit of this nation from the way the migration has gone since he's come into power, and wants to wipe away the way they're playing it, the identity of this country. And it's not about being right-wing, it's about being English. And it's about people feeling in the bottom of their hearts that they can't keep putting up with it.
Yeah.
They can't keep putting up. For I do not know, after only the amount of time this government has been in power, how we're going to look in 4 years' time. What mess are they going to leave us? What people out there in England, what do you want? What do you want to be left with? Because it's getting bad, and something needs to be done.
What do you think, what's the most pressing area, Peter, for you? When you look out your window, just to coin a phrase, what is it that is giving you a sense of you're not recognising what once was?
I think the thing that broke the camel's back was when we've just seen recently, not that we didn't know it was already happening, but Isabel Oakeshott's video of what these people are doing and in this lawless behaviour on our streets. They should be, if they come here, in my view, first of all, they should be put into great big aircraft hangars with a couple of showers and some food and told to get on with it. And if they don't like it, they should stick them in national service or do something. There's no way that these people should be coming in this country as a free ride and turning us upside down. And we are now becoming second-class citizens. Could not believe my ears when, in the winter, a Labour government, and I didn't vote for them, a Labour government decided to take away heating allowance. How basic can it be?
Yeah.
And now, having had some pressure put on this country as regards Trump and what then the Americans are not going to be doing in Europe, suddenly they're interested in building arms. But they've shut down the blimmin' steelworks. so we can't build our top armaments. If we were clever, we'd build our armaments and we'd sell them around the world.
Well, we can't fuel our country, let alone heat it. We don't seem to be able to do that independently. There's a lot we can't do independently that we could do if there was the political motivation to go in that direction. But we are sort of hampered now with curious economic considerations as set out by an absolutely woeful Chancellor, and also the whole net zero thing as set out by an absolutely woeful Secretary of State for Energy. So we are kind of on the very key areas, energy security, financial security. We're being run by, a pair of simian-like dodgepots.
I mean, I don't know how anybody talks about Rachel Reeves at Oxford University. As far as I'm concerned, she got kicked out of drama school at an Oxford Poly. I mean, it's an absolute disgrace what is happening to this country economically.
Indeed. There it is. Peter, thank you. Peter in Dorset. Claire is in the Wirral. Claire, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay, thanks,
Good.
Ian.
What are your thoughts on this?
Happy St George's Day.
Yeah, and to you too.
Yeah, and talking of Rachel Reeves, she went to uni, so that's saying a lot because she's been indoctrinated into the woke ideology, which is what I was going to say about being embarrassed. Why are we embarrassed about the St George flag?
Yeah.
We're embarrassed because the whole of our population for decades has been indoctrinated and told about white unconscious bias, our awful history, dreadful history, and so it goes on. If you're indoctrinated into our universities, where the top people go, and even the bottom people now, because everyone's going to uni, no matter how clever you are, you're all going to be indoctrinated en masse. Was that an idea of Blair's? Maybe it was. But, they come out, we all come out of our universities, we get there into the establishment, into the police force with their Euro flag waving and their coloured flags in the police force, the Home Office, Euro waving, coloured flags. Where else do you want to go? We go everywhere and into our governments as well. So unfortunately, this is why we are embarrassed about Britain, about England. And, I don't know what's going to happen. Yeah. How can you stop this indoctrination?
So there is so this has happened over a number of decades now, Claire, that we've found
definitely.
ourselves.
Yeah, and I mean it's gone into everything. Our judiciary.
Sure.
It started in our universities, and we've still got it. So even this sort of trans debate, there's that sort of worry in my mind that a woman is a woman, but if the woke brigade, which is basically throughout our society, don't really want to agree with it or bend to the rules, they'll still be talking about it in our universities. They'll still be talking about, children binding themselves up and having to sort of change their gender, and all this Stonewall crap, I'm sorry to say. So,
they speak well of you over there at Stonewall, by the way, Claire.
I bet they do. Well, I think,
I've said it before. Stonewall did some sterling work back in the day, and then they suddenly went nuts and decided they need a new cause. And this is the one they chose. I think they backed the wrong horse, but that's another story. Listen, Claire, I've got to move, but you make a very passionate. I can hear the incredulity, the annoyance, the resigned to, or can it get betterness in your voice. And thank you, Claire. More from you in a moment. We'll get on to that story as well about minority crimes. Ministry of Justice says probation officers must consider the trauma of ethnic minority criminals before they are sentenced. We'll talk to Chris Daw, KC, the barrister, writer and broadcaster, often divides the room. Does our Chris? We'll find out more on what his view is on this. Coming next on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is indeed Talk. 034 499 1000. Loads to get through here. More St George's Day comments as well. What does Englishness actually mean, or does it mean to you? I mean, it probably means different things to different people. We'll take a look at that. And this, the Justice Secretary has ordered a review into controversial court bail rules that prioritise ethnic minority suspects. This is Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, told MPs she won't allow equality before the law to be compromised. It follows criticism from Robert Jenrick over guidance urging judges to consider an offender's culture when deciding bail. So we've had some interesting sentencing issues. This is in addition, as I understand it, to that. Let's get a word on this and some clarity, perhaps. Chris Daw, KC, barrister, writer and broadcaster, is back with us. Out of court, it's a rarity these days, Chris. You're a busy man. Good afternoon.
I'm sorry, Ian. I miss you. It's been a while since down in your lovely warm studio, and someone made me a delicious cup of tea before we came on here.
I know, those days are long gone, but I hope we can rekindle this, like almost a new Netflix show starting. You know, we can bring it together and have the joyous attention of a gripped nation as we reconvene. What about this story then? Look, I know you've got views on the sort of racial bias, I think you've called it in the past, in the justice system. As I understand it, and I'm going to put it in its crudest terms here, somebody's working out bail conditions for a suspect, ethnic minority suspect, happens to be a black kid. They can consider what? The slavery? What's the deal here?
No, it's not that at all. I think it's important to kind of separate out two issues, really. The first issue is that there is absolutely no doubt that you are overwhelmingly more likely to be stopped by the police, searched by the police, arrested by the police, charged by the CPS, convicted in court and sent to prison if you're black. That's a statistical fact, and it's overwhelmingly the case. Many, many times more likely to suffer any one of those things just because you're black. Not because you're somehow more criminal, but just because you're black. And people often don't fully necessarily grapple with why that is. And the reason is because overwhelmingly densely populated areas, which were densely populated with people from ethnic minorities, are in urban environments. They're in East London, for example, or other parts of London. They're in certain parts of Manchester, certain parts of Birmingham, very, very heavy ethnic minority populations. And in those areas, there is much more intensive on-the-street policing than there is in areas which are predominantly white areas, like, for example, where I live, which is a relatively small country village, which, frankly, has a very low ethnic minority population. And I don't think I've seen a policeman in about 4 years around here. So the chances, if one of my kids is walking around, I'm not saying they do this, but if they're walking along smoking a spliff, or if one of them happens to sell some weed to one of their mates, the chances of any white kids ever really getting into trouble with the law are very small, because there aren't really police around watching them in those communities.
So it's not a bias then? It's not a... it's good, accurate coppering, policing?
No, it is a bias if you think about it, because if you're a 16 or 17-year-old black lad in Hackney, the chances of you being stopped for doing exactly the same thing that a 16-year-old is doing in Cheshire or Buckinghamshire are 7, 8 or 10 times higher, purely because there's a higher police presence.
But there should be a higher police presence in the other places. So Hackney have got it right. It's not an anti-black or an anti-ethnic minority position.
They haven't got it right, Ian. This is the problem.
More coppers on the street catching criminals. That's right, surely.
No, it's not. Just think about what I've just said. If you're a 16-year-old white lad who grows up in a middle-class area and goes to a predominantly white school, you might smoke weed, you might do all exactly the same things that the black lads are doing in Hackney. The difference is you'll never get arrested because there's no police to arrest you, and also because you've probably got other social props in place and money in place to try and make the problem...
But that's an argument for more police, isn't it, in those areas?
It's not an argument
for more police. It's not an argument for less police in the other areas.
No, it's not. It's an argument for not over-criminalising one group, predominantly young, predominantly ethnic minority people, and not criminalising the other. I'm not saying you should criminalise most of the things that young black lads are pulled over for, arrested for, stopped for, are nonsense. And most of them don't have anything on them. The problem is when you over-criminalise over generations, one group of people or one group section of society, in this case, those from ethnic minorities, you end up with this vast disparity in outcomes. outcomes, where sort of half the prison population are from ethnic minorities in some prisons, and yet only 3.5% or 4% of the general population are black.
I mean, that could be, you could extrapolate various things from that, couldn't you? I mean, there is an argument that I've always thought that, you know, poverty and class play a huge factor in this, not just somebody's colour. You're right about the numbers, they're there for all to see. But the story behind it, I think, is more nuanced than perhaps you're telling us here, Chris. I mean, if this is about people who live in tough, rough areas, there will be some white families in those areas. They will also be susceptible and subject to those same issues.
Now you've hit the nail on the head, because that's exactly what doesn't happen. Because what happens is, if you're, as I had a client who was a black bank manager, very successful young black manager, driving a very nice car. He got stopped in London, driving around London, roughly twice a week. Eventually, he was arrested twice and accused of having a gun when he didn't have one, and he had to end up suing the police. If you're a white doctor, Ian, driving the same car, same exact locations, you'll never get pulled over.
But is that an issue about looking at other forms of criminality? And again, I don't think it's because somebody has black skin, they're somehow born to, you know, carry out more crimes. I mean, that's just a stupid argument. But there is such a sense of being part of an ethnic group where, for many reasons, you are disproportionately represented in criminal statistics. Not all of those people will be, but some of them will be. And that's just a fact, isn't it? Now, that could be gang culture would be an obvious one, right? Loads of black gangs, you don't have the same problem with white gangs. So you would naturally, in those areas, be looking at young black kids, hence a disproportionate amount of young black kids getting pulled over, and the knock-on effect.
We didn't. You remember? You've forgotten what I've just said. I've just said the same exact person, but one's got black skin and one's got white skin, gets a different treatment by the police, and that doesn't just apply to your black doctor driving around London in his BMW. That applies to a young black lad on his way to college with his books in his backpack, doing nothing wrong. A white lad in a posh area is never going to get stopped for the police.
But that's because there's not enough coverage. That comes back to that, doesn't it? There's two separate arguments there. In terms of this bail thing, considering an offender's sort of bail conditions, considering an offender's culture, what do you take that to mean, Chris?
Well, I mean, it almost doesn't make any sense to me at all to talk about considering culture, because culture isn't really the issue. The principal issue here is race. It comes down to this. As I've said already, you are vastly more criminalised and brought into the criminal justice system just because of the colour of your skin. So when it comes to bail, it's absolutely true that black people are much more likely to be refused bail for the same crime with the same criminal record than white people. Why is that? Is it because individual judges or magistrates are racist? Probably not. It's simply because there is a cultural bias in favour of criminalising certain communities and certain races over others. And it's understandable that that cultural bias is here and that racist kind of preference and bias is in place. It's understandable that that happens, and that's why you need rules that say, let's look at this carefully and make sure we are taking full account of the individual circumstances and not just ticking a box of sending yet another black.
But you know, Chris, I mean, maybe as a defence lawyer you might resist this analysis, but when I speak to police officers, they are often scared witless to go into areas where there's young ethnic minority, young black boys in particular, but other ethnic minorities, because they sense, hang on a sec, I know I've got body-worn camera on me, I know there's CCTV everywhere, but I'm going to be accused of being a racist. The irredeemable reality, however, is that in this area, areas of North London, you mentioned East London as well, where you've got just by dint of fact, gang culture, knife crime, perpetrator black, victim black, by a country mile. So we know, and within that gang culture, we've also got drug-related offences and some sexual offences too. That completely overshadows anything of its equivalence in the peer group of other ethnicities. Now, if that is the case, well, it's not nonsense. Well, you're telling me
it's nonsense. Okay. You're saying that black gangs overshadow white gangs. I don't know if you know anything about
100%.
Justice system. But Ian, come on. I've been a criminal law for 32 years. The gangs that I have seen operated by white people operate in exactly the same way as those operated by any other race. The difference is, if you're a black drug dealer, you're much more likely to get arrested than if you're
also much more likely to use a knife and be on the recipient of a knife. Yes, you are. Look at the stats, Chris. Are you telling me there aren't more young black kids die by the blade than there are white kids? Are you seriously telling me, as an experienced lawyer of 3 decades, you can't believe that? It's not true.
If you have a statistic to tell me, give me a statistic rather than just a loud, shouty argument.
It's not a shouty argument. I'm not shouting.
What's the number then?
What's the number? It's not a shouty argument.
Give me the number.
Cressida Dick at the last Home Affairs Select Committee.
Ian. How many black people are killed by black-on-black violence against white people being killed by white people? I'll guarantee you, more white people are killed by white people than black people are killed by black people. That is a fact.
Right. Young black kids, knife crime in London.
Okay, so now we're just focusing on young black kids.
Well, when I talk about kids, I'm talking about teenagers.
We're going to demonise young black people now.
I'm talking about dead. I'm talking about dead kids here, not demonising.
You are demonising the black community by making the point that somehow that's to do with race as opposed to it's an urban environment.
No, it's to do with gang culture. That's my point. It's not to do
whether it's white, black, or brown.
It's to do with the nature of that gang culture in that area.
It's to do with the fact that it's an urban environment.
Okay, I'll find you the last set of numbers, because they do change from year to year. I will find those numbers and I'll broadcast them in terms of young kids dying of knife crime in London.
White murders versus black-on-black murders.
Yeah.
See, because you were suggesting that black people are getting killed by their own in much greater numbers.
Correct.
That is not true.
That is
Unless
true.
you pick a very small subset. If you go to Guadalajara in Mexico, do you think the gang violence is black-on-black there? No, of course it's not. It's Hispanic on Hispanic, because that's the urban environment. That's the nature of the environment. If you go to Chicago, there are black gangs, there are white gangs, there are Hispanic gangs. It's nothing to do with race.
So you are
urban gang environment.
Chris, so when I find the specific figure for the latest data, which is likely to be for 2024, and there's 70 kids dead who were stabbed, usually in the streets, often in broad daylight, you are satisfied that there will be an equal proportion of white victims as there are black victims?
I'm not suggesting that at all, because
that's kind of what you said.
No, it wasn't what I said. What I said was, you will find in any equivalent urban environment, you will find the same rates of murder and crime all over the world. It doesn't matter about race. It matters about the urban environment. And overwhelmingly, the black population in this country is focused and mostly lives, not all, but mostly lives in urban environments.
Yeah, I agree. It isn't because somebody's born black. I agree with you. There's no gene that makes you a stabber or a murderer. I understand that completely. But there can be an environment, there can be circumstances. That could be gang-related, it could be poverty-connected, it could be all of those things. All I know, Chris, is that without a shadow of a doubt, you and I can walk into Paddy Power or William Hill tomorrow, and it will be an unsavoury bet to have, but I can tell you now, you will find more young black kids dying at the hands of other young black kids, usually connected to gang culture, than you would white kids. In other areas of crime, you'll find, look, football hooliganism, you'll find more white guys. I get that.
To be fair, you'll also find more white women being murdered by white men than you'll find black women being murdered by black men. If you pick a particular cohort, obviously it's different. It depends where they live.
But it's about proportions, isn't it?
The majority of violent crime in this country is committed by white people.
Okay.
That's a fact. So let's just take race.
As a proportion of the population.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But the chances of a white person being brought to justice, being taken to court and prosecuted for exactly the same thing, are a fraction of the chances of it happening.
So when the Home Office tell us the latest stats show that foreign criminals, Afghans, Albanians in particular, Eritreans, are more likely, 18 times more likely to commit a sexual offence than an indigenous person in this country, you would refute that as well?
I totally would refute that. It's ridiculous.
Why have the Home Office said it?
Because the Home Office statistics are nonsense. They do not bear any relation to reality. Do you really think that all the unreported, unresolved sexual offences, of which there are tens and tens of thousands in this country, do you really think there's any reliable statistic that suggests that one group of people, a small number of people, by the way, are statistically somehow more likely to be sex offenders just because of their culture or their background or their race? It's just rubbish.
Well, not your race, but maybe your culture.
It's rubbish, Ian. It's utter rubbish.
On that point, Chris, it's always good locking horns with Chris Daw, KC, the barrister, writer and broadcaster. Thank you to him. I think there's going to be some fairly strong response on that. I can almost hear the stats flying into our social media box. Your response is 87222 if you're messaging, 0344 499 1000 if you're on the blower. It's coming up on 10 to 3. This is Talk.
Competition's a good thing, and the Tories have had their chance. They had 14 years to turn the country around and make it grow again and great again, and they did the opposite. And so people won't forgive and they won't forget. That's why we're surging in the polls. That's why we are in almost every poll now ahead of the Tories, very often by more than the margin of error. And so we will just keep doing what we seem to be doing pretty well. And obviously we're looking forward to the results coming through on May the 2nd from all the various elections.
It's complete misogyny, and that was a threat to strap, or at least it was a dream of strapping J.K. Rowling to a stake and burning her alive for the sin of believing in biology. So this is two-tier Britain summed up. If you're a woman on the internet and you make a stupid comment during the riots, you get banged up for 31 months. If you're a bloke on the streets and you hold up such a sick placard as that, apparently nothing's happened so far anyway. You know, the thing is, these protests were orgies of misogyny.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 0344 499 1000. The latest figures on knife crime, the ones from 2022, this is from london.gov, so this is the government view. Despite black Londoners make up 13% of the population, accounting for 45% of London's knife murder victims and 61% of knife murder perpetrators and 53% of knife crime perpetrators. That was the figure I was trying to get to Chris Daw to try and impress upon him. Now, obviously, if you look at the ethnicity of offenders overall, you will find, for example, offender ethnicity in the year March 2023, 68% of convicted principal suspects in homicide cases were white, and in terms of victim ethnicity, 65% were white. That is quite true. what he was saying. 16.9% were black, 18.9% from other ethnic minorities. This is about proportions. This was the point that I heard somebody talking about this recently as well. I think it was something online when somebody didn't get the proportion of rate. And that was the point. Now, it's also important to stress so that people don't run away with themselves on some kind of sort of national front ticket going, yeah, right, yeah, it's all the blacks, isn't it? That it isn't that. That is not it's not because somebody is born black that they suddenly become a murderer. There's like a special gene that you have that goes, yeah, when you get to the age of 16, you pick up a knife and have a unhealthy habit and desire to want to go and stab somebody with it. This is a cultural thing that can happen from kids born into completely decent families who go off the beaten track. So it's gang culture related. It's all of those factors. You can even throw in, if you like, popular culture. I would include everything from song lyrics and beyond into that too. So there is an issue around that, and we shouldn't shun away from discussing it. I think Chris Daw was reading some different stats. I don't know where they were from. I'm going to talk to James in Wolverhampton in just a second. Before we do, let's go to... it's the Voice of Doom. It's an all-time record. The Mystery Voice has now gone on for 15 days. This is day 15. We still haven't got a winner for this particular voice. Have a listen.
Political decisions were taken.
Who is that, for goodness sake? Somebody's got to know. Don't ring in, because at this end we are bereft of prizes. We're not giving anything away here. You can message in if you want to have a crack at this. That's up to you, 87222, if you know who this is.
Political decisions were taken.
Hopefully in about 10 minutes I can reveal the answer. Finally, after 15 long days, here it is again.
Political decisions were taken.
Who is that? 87222. Back to your calls. It's St George's Day. James in Wolverhampton. On that issue of Englishness, James, what are your thoughts on this? Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, Ian. Right, I'm second generation Indian, yeah? Mm-hmm. I wear the English shirt when England are playing.
Yep.
And I just don't understand what the issue is. Not only me, a lot of my other Indian. But when I go to India, I wear the shirt in India. And they absolutely sort of love and respect the fact that I'm English, you know. And when it comes to cricket, I actually support England, not India. So I just don't understand where.
Didn't somebody once call it the cricket bat test? I don't know who it was. Which, by the way, I don't agree with necessarily. I think you should be, you should be able to support who the heck you like, right?
Yeah. No, but what I'm saying is, look, I think you should be proud of where you come from or where you were born. You know, my affections lie in this country and not in India. I might be brown by colour, but I'm white inside. And if anybody wants to call me a coconut, that's fine.
Oh, you probably had that in your past.
Yeah, but it doesn't bother me. But I'm not unique. There's a lot of Indian and Muslim people that think exactly the same as me. But I wish people will, sort of stop going so woke and be proud of where you're from,
You see, it is that, isn't it? You just be proud of where you're from, You don't have to make a big deal out of it.
But don't you think the French are proud of where they're from?
The French, do you know what? I watched a programme the other day. I think it was Rick Stein or one of those TV chefs going round the place. And he was in France, and he's obviously an expert chef himself, and he was cooking in a restaurant with another chef. And he said, the one thing I've realised over the years, he said, I've made so many programmes in France and I've been to so many French restaurants. He said, the one thing about the French, he said, is they love being French. And I thought, that's so true. They love it. Yeah. They don't hide away from it. They don't suggest that people are inferior because they're not. They just love being French.
Yeah, and that's why when it comes to coming in over here and taking over an English company, they will close us down rather than close one of their own down, And they're more patriotic, and so are the Germans, so are the Italians. But the problem is, that Claire was brilliant, the one from Wirral.
That's right.
She hit the nail on the head because we got to stop the universities and everything. We're just being too silly. just be. It doesn't matter what colour you are. You can still be English.
Yeah, there it is. I love it. Listen, great call. James, thank you very much indeed for that. Love it. Great call. This is from Mark, who says, Ian, you've been shut up, but legal KC asking you for your so-called stats regarding crime makes a change. You got called out on your racist bias views. Well done, Chris. A bit of clarity on Talk Radio. Thanks, Mark. Bet you don't read this out, Mr. Collins. I wrote a book once called I Bet You Won't Read This, based on people who say that kind of nonsense. I don't know why I'd read it out. Two things. Yet initially, I certainly didn't have the crime stat. I didn't know we were going to talk about that. So yeah, I said to him, "Give me 2 minutes. I'll come up with the stats," and I just did. But even prior to that, I did give him the latest Home Office stats, and he said they were rubbish. And this one comes from Ian. He says he asked you to quote stats, and when you quoted the Home Office stats, he said they were rubbish. Are there special Chris Dawes stats that we should be quoting? There we are. Lucy says, my son is white and posh, was stopped and searched randomly by the police in Newcastle. No reason given. Please tell this agitated barrister. Thank you to Lucy for that. Don't go away. Andrew in Halifax with you shortly. Lots to get through in the next section. 0344 499 1000. We went on a bit of a tangent with Chris Dawes. We started out on one subject and kind of moved into another. So you might want to respond on what we ended up talking about, which was the kind of knife crime stats and the like. And his views on it. He says there is, essentially racial bias in the criminal justice system. He believes that is, demonstrable there for all to see. Is it bias, or is there another reason behind what we were discussing? Your response to his response, if you like, or even my response, if you want. Keep it clear-headed if you can. Not everyone adheres to that basic rule. And, of course, we have the voice of doom. Have we got a winner? Can you identify this voice?
Political decisions were taken.
87222. We'll tell you the right answer if we get it after the news.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yes, good afternoon. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. Coming up, we've been discussing Keir Starmer saying England faces a never-ending fight for our flag, urging it to be wrenched from the hands of those who sow division and incite hatred. Responses like this, just St George. By the way, there's elections coming up, so clearly he's saying stuff like this. But in terms of St George's Day, which is today, by the way, officially, I know they've moved it around a bit this year, but officially 23rd of April. What does it mean to be English? How do you define that identity? How do you feel as an English person? And your perception of the English if you're not English? Lines are open on that. Also this afternoon, Tory leader Kemi Badenoch accusing the Prime Minister of hiding after the Supreme Court ruled trans women aren't legally women, claiming he doesn't have the balls to express his views on gender. It was a nice response from her. We'll have more on that in just a moment. And experiments to dim the sun could get the green light within weeks. I'm not kidding. They're going to dim the sun as scientists explore ways to reflect sunlight, such as cloud brightening. Under £50 million in climate prevention projects are involved, and this is one of them. We'll have more on that astonishing, bright story in just a bit. 0344 499 1000. 4 minutes after 3 o'clock. So, the voice of doom. Have we finally, please, have we got a winner? It's day 15. This is the longest mystery voice we've had. The record was 14 days. Today is the 15th day for this. Have we got a winner, or will it knock into day 16? Let's have a listen to the voice again.
Political decisions were taken.
There it is. These are some of the wrong answers. Dominic Raab, no. Cecil Parkinson, Ian Duncan Smith. Every day. So can you write these answers down so that you don't say them tomorrow? Because some of these come up every day. Ian Duncan Smith, Greg Clark, David Cameron. Always David Cameron and Ian Duncan Smith are always there. John McDonnell, no. Norman Tebbit, no. Carwyn Jones, it is not. Simon Jones, no. John Major. Can we have a listen to that again?
Political decisions were taken.
I mean, come on, it's clearly not John Major, right? You haven't even got to have been alive. Even our Amy knows it's not John Major, and she's 12. It's not Jack Straw either. Listen to it again.
Political decisions were taken.
Yeah. Even Adam, our producer, who's never heard of Jack Straw because he's from Australia, even he knows it's not Jack Straw. So don't say Jack Straw. We'll bring it back tomorrow for day 16. It's the longest one of these has gone on for. Will we finally get away? I know I keep saying this, but we've had voices that I think are harder than that have gone like that on day one. But not this one. This sneaky little what's-it is hanging around like a bad smell. It's back tomorrow, 2:45. Now, Kemi Badenoch has accused Keir Starmer of being a weather vane who twists in the wind on gender issues, claiming he doesn't have the balls to state his true views. The Prime Minister, who once said trans women are women, has welcomed the Supreme Court ruling that the legal definition of a woman should be based on biological sex. So he didn't know this before, apparently. It took a court ruling to convince him what a woman is. I'm not sure that's put him in any better position on this. However, the Tory leader has criticised Labour ministers for lying about backing female-only spaces and says the PM can't admit he was wrong. Let's have a listen to Kemi Badenoch and what she had to say at PMQs today.
Mr. Speaker, he's clearly so uncomfortable talking about this subject. Yes. This is a choice between a Conservative Party that stood up for common sense and a Labour Party that bent the knee to every passing fad. This is a question about moral courage, Mr. Speaker, about doing the right thing even when it is difficult. And the truth is, he doesn't have the balls.
I can only assume that sounded better when she did it in the mirror earlier on. But the truth is, it doesn't really matter what the Leader of the Opposition says, because nobody believes, none of them, that she's going to lead them into the next election anyway.
Oh, he invoked the old "did it in the mirror" line. Heard that a dozen times in Parliament. Let's get a word on this with Kate Barker, CEO of the LGB Alliance. Kate, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
I just said that you probably heard me. I'm not sure this makes it any better for Keir Starmer, because what he's now saying is that despite all of those interviews he gave, radio, TV, anyone can have a cervix, and it's quite funny when you say it out loud, isn't it? Anyone can have a cervix, a trans woman is a woman, etc. He's now saying he doesn't believe that anymore because of a court ruling, not because he's somehow philosophically come to his senses.
Yeah, I mean, Kerry Badenoch's been great, obviously. She's been talking about single-sex spaces and that lesbians, gay men and bisexuals should be able to identify as same-sex attracted and not same-gender attracted for a long time, before it was fashionable, before it was expedient. But now it is expedient, clearly, and this is the change that we see. I think the Labour Party have been really, really careful about this issue. And we've seen, as the influence of LGBTQ plus Labour has begun to fizzle out, people like Angela Eagle and Chris Byron of the WhatsApp leaks, I think they fully expected to come in with a huge majority to Parliament to kind of thunder forward with a mandate for the LGBTQ plus lobby, throwing legislation left, right and centre. And they've been really surprised that it hasn't happened. And I think Keir Starmer's been caught a little bit on the hop about this as well. And to my mind, that's because they've been heavily reliant on the polls, which have seen a massive shift around these issues in the last 2 years. So recent YouGov polls, for example, show 80% of people don't want to see a trans woman in women's sports. 80% of people think it's wrong to give kids puberty blockers. And what's interesting about that as well is that's averaged out across every demographic. But even the 18 to 24-year-olds, and this will have been a wake-up call for Labour, even the 18 to 24-year-olds, a majority feel the same way. So I think they've been a little bit cowardly, waiting to see what the polls say. The Supreme Court helped them across the line. I have to say as well that these demonstrations over the weekend will have served to push our aims and our agenda forward, and will have played really, really badly for extreme trans activists. Yeah. It was an absolute shamble. I think they looked like crackpots. They very much looked like people who had no idea, a bit of a rent-a-mob, why they were there. I think if you'd asked 100 people there, what is it actually that you're protesting about? What's this all about?
100%.
I reckon 99 of them wouldn't have had a clue.
Well, there was one fella banging on about Palestine and trans and Palestine being the same thing.
Totally. Quiz for Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, really? I mean, has he never opened a newspaper? But that's another story. But to me, what I still, and I'm sure you do, Kate, as well, I still think of my nan, telling her, like, if 30, 40 years ago she could have heard this debate, and me knocking her door saying, Nan, they're having a court case today to decide what a woman is. She'd have thought that the world just ended, and it was or Jeremy Beadle was about to walk through the door. I mean, it would just be absolute chaos, and yet here we are. We've had to get to this curious stage in order to establish what I think most sane people already knew.
Yeah, it was completely surreal, actually. I was in the Supreme Court because we intervened. Yeah. We were the lesbian interveners, which we think sounds like a gritty Glaswegian detective series after this.
Or some Doctor Who enemies, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, possibly. but our intervention was really straightforward. We just said, well, lesbians are women attracted to other women. Lesbians are never men. Lesbians don't have a penis. And lesbians should be able to gather in spaces without men present. And it was so astonishingly simple. Of course, our barristers were very, very clever in the way they put it together. But really, when you look at it, it seemed absolutely absurd that we were even there to talk about it.
100%.
I have to say as well that the judgment and the ruling, people that know these kind of things say this is actually the most straightforward and easy to understand.
Correct.
Ruling for absolutely decades from the Supreme Court. So a lot of the people now who are making excuses, and I'll include Keir Starmer in that, and saying, well, it's such a complicated issue and it's so difficult to unpick and there's an awful lot to think about. I mean, there isn't. It's really straightforward.
Yep.
but sex is biological. All this ruling has done is clarified what the law was already, and it's unpicked this willful complication of it and a creation of a kind of an opaque fog around this, which has been carried out by lobby groups. And a question I would have, looking at those crowds of people scribbling on statues and bellowing into megaphones, is, you know, why are you mad at women? Why are you mad at women? Why aren't you mad at the lobby groups that have spent 10 years pretending that you can change sex and then doubling down on that lie with the fiction that the whole world is really going to be happy to go along with it?
Correct. Yeah.
Why aren't you mad at them? But of course, it's a good excuse to be misogynistic and.
Well, it was, this whole thing was draped in misogyny and all sorts of other horrors. And again, and I'm sure you would share this analysis, Kate, but you know, it was never really about trans people. It was about sort of mad trans activists. You know, often blokes that, you know, somehow found themselves in this political argument for whatever reason. And I can remember the insanity. I mean, as if it wasn't insane enough to begin with. I remember that moment. And I certainly asked one of these activists this a while ago. I'm not the first, and you'll be aware of the question. And I said, so you're saying that a gay woman, if a gay woman doesn't fancy a trans woman who still has a penis, then that gay woman is a transphobe. And now I thought, this is my pincer movement moment. He's going to go, yeah, you got me there. No. Yeah. He went, yes, they're a transphobe. And I thought, right, we're done here. This is how mad this has got. You would be considered a transphobe, Kate, on that basis. I mean, this is upside down, mad stuff, right?
Totally. And that point was made really clearly to the 5 judges of the Supreme Court. They were absolutely perplexed at this point. They clearly never considered it before. So we're very much of the mind that it was the lesbians what won it, because they listened to that, precisely what you said, and tried to unpick even the idea that if a man, what about if he gets a gender recognition certificate? You know, he goes online and pays his £6 or whatever it is. Does that mean he's a lesbian? And they clearly thought that was absurd, that a small administrative process could impact not just how that man identified, but more importantly, how the rest of the world is meant to interact with him. And I think that's the nub of it. People are still free, and they must be free they can call themselves whatever they like, they can dress as they like, they can interact in any way and exist in the world in any way that they like, until that point at which you would expect me to lie, to affirm your delusion, or to change, or to endanger myself, or to disadvantage myself in any way on your behalf. And that just isn't on. And women and lesbians and gay men as well say, enough.
Indeed. And a word, just a word from the straight man as well, because he's obviously in the same position as being accused of this transphobia. And I saw some half-wit, I think, from America on this occasion, making a video talking about, if you won't date a trans woman, you're transphobic, you have something wrong with you, you should be arrested. And I thought, hang on, so I'm meant to date someone. If I don't want to date somebody with a penis, then I am somehow, I mean, we shouldn't even be talking about this, Kate, because it's so stupid, and yet this became sort of part of it. But thankfully it was, as you rightly say, it was the Supreme Court were able to consider this madness when making this judgment. Yeah,
and there are still people who are really doubling down behind it. The danger for Labour and for Keir Starmer is not his own MPs, because I think the new intake, we were unsure which way they turn. I think they're going to stick with Keir. The danger is with the unions. So at that demonstration, all the demonstrations, there were banners from people like the RMT and Unite and UCU. But if they polled their members and said, does a lesbian have a penis, and should a double rapist go into a women's prison, I'm absolutely certain they'd give a resounding no to that. But the leadership of the unions is gripped by a kind of an ideological fervour that distances them entirely from the real life experiences of their members. And it's 100%. It's inevitable, as happened with the Supreme Court, it's inevitable that real life hits your ideology. And at that point, it just crumbles away.
Of course it does. And I do sense as well, and partly as well, Kate, I guess, you know, with the sort of, you know, pronoun evangelism and all the stuff that goes with it, a lot of companies, similarly to the unions, they've kind of curiously stuck in this cul-de-sac, because I get the sense that for years, instinctively they felt, oh, if I have a problem with this, I'm somehow phobic, or, you know, I'm up there with a racist. And that's how this argument was kind of solved. You and I are no better than some old mad racist because we have this very sensible, ordinary view. But it was sold like that, and I sense corporations and I saw one gym responding to a journalist when she asked, you know, can you tell me who is allowed to use your changing rooms? And they literally said anyone who identifies as a woman. And yeah, I mean, it's extra. And I don't think they said that because they really believe it. I think they said it because they were scared that they were going to be sort of caught out and accused of some sort of phobic disorder. And so that's the one they've been running with. Hopefully this decision will clarify some of that madness.
I hope so. I think a lot of business leaders are really struggling to deal with this. And one of the reasons for that is there's been a real rise in staff networks. So staff networks have always existed in organisations, but the LGB staff networks have been kind of hijacked by the TQ plus movement. Inevitably, in the big staff networks, it's a straight cross-dressing man leading it. And I had an email this morning from somebody who works in the ambulance service, whose staff network, she's a lesbian, and the staff network sent out a thing saying how awful it was about the Supreme Court and how worried everyone must be, and reminding people that don't worry, because you're still under the protected characteristic of gender identity, but which of course is not a protected characteristic. The protected characteristic is gender reassignment. Yeah. And what we see is these networks pushing out false information. They've got that information from lobby groups, big lobby groups that have encouraged organisations to do what they call going beyond the law, but which is just a kind of a weaselly way of saying to break the law for your own advantage. Yeah. And those chickens are coming home to roost for the organisations that pushed those lies.
Yeah. Indeed. Listen, Kate, it's been great to speak. Let's talk again. I'm sure we will on this. Kate Barker is the CEO of the LGBT Alliance, just speaking basic common sense and stuff. Pauline Fife says, a lesbian by definition is a female who is sexually attracted to other females. If a trans woman is sexually attracted to other women, then by definition she's also a lesbian. Well, she's not a she, she's a man. That's the difference, I guess. But you can call yourself whatever you like, Paul. I agree with that. 0344 499 1000. Little bit of news on the Birmingham bin strike. It's easy to forget that's still going on. Talks to resolve it are to involve the coalition service, conciliation service, ACAS, for the first time, because a deal could be in touching distance. The Unite Union has announced. I remember the word ACAS and the conciliation service, ACAS, being bandied around. When I was a kid growing up, it was probably like miners' strike, print workers' strike, that kind of stuff. It was sort of everywhere. The ACAS, who are these mysterious ACAS people? So I always assumed that they were in there from the off, but apparently not until now. Could ACAS break the deal? Could ACAS get those bins collected? Let's hope so. 21 minutes after 3 now, this is Talk.
What Robert had said was that he's fully engaged to put reform out of business, because unless there is united opposition behind the Conservative Party to Sir Keir Starmer, we will end up with a risk that you get another Labour government, a radical Labour government by default. And so it is important, as Robert Jenrick said, that all of our efforts, the Conservative Party, are to put forward a Conservative platform that unites the right.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Mark says, in the light of this recent Supreme Court ruling, do we think the NHS will apologise to the midwife who was suspended for misgendering the... I don't think she was a midwife, she was a nurse, wasn't she? For misgendering the prisoner who needed a catheter fitted. Surely now she should be reinstated. I think she's suspended at the moment, I think. She should be, Mark, in Preston, you're absolutely bang on. But I do sense that the NHS and others are kind of digging their heels and going, no, we will stick to what we believe are, they see it as decency and politeness and all the rest of it. I mean, it was absolute nonsense. This poor nurse was, I think, racially abused, possibly violently abused as a result of what happened. The patient wasn't just a patient, they were a prisoner as well. And I think the prisoner, he, who apparently now identifies as a she, was... overheard the nurse talking. Jennifer Mele, apologies for not getting her name correctly if I said it wrongly there, if I misnamed her, previously investigated discipline by St Helier Hospital in London after refusing to refer to a child sex offender patient as a woman. That was it. So it was a child sex offender patient who was having a catheter fitted, so it's a bloke with a willy. Following widespread coverage of a case in the media, she was suspended this week and accused of breaching the patient's confidentiality. After a 5-minute meeting with the manager, she was ordered to collect her belongings and escorted out of the hospital in tears. And I think this is because she went public with the story, which led to her suspension. Will they change their views? Well, these kind of corporations and institutions have a great habit, a good track record of digging their heels in. They should do, Mark, but don't hold your breath. Matt's in Cheshire. Happy St George's Day, Matt. Good afternoon to you.
And to you, Ian. It's a glorious day here. It couldn't be a better day for it.
Is it sunny in Cheshire today?
It's absolutely gorgeous.
Is it? It's absolutely dull and cloudy, and I'm fascinated by that. You know, you're only 2 hours away, for God's sake.
You're not in England, though, are you? You're in London. Well,
That's very
in
true.
England.
That's very true. Yeah, it's a whole different country. It's a whole different principality, this place.
Yeah, I wrote some comments down about sort of what is England or being English, and about Starmer's comments.
Yeah.
I just wrote, Labour have purposely tried to shame the flag as if it symbolises ignorance, bigotry, and an insular nation for years, and Starmer's comments show that. They themselves, as traitors, hate the English and look down on us, and as they do with all Judeo-Christian nations. The likes of Starmer think they can throw on an England football shirt, hold a pint and fool us all, while being an IRA supporting Davos internationalist. And as for being English, England is the communities in all regions throughout the nation that still fight for the standards of life, beliefs, and the way of life the world has envied for centuries. We have led the world at some point in all fields of human endeavour, be it democracy, political first, the arts and literature, exploration, aviation, invention, archaeology, medicine, and military might. Even the so-called bad of the empire created sanitation, roads, and railways. And my final thought would be, England is the guy that threw Keir Starmer out of his pub.
Yeah, that's... I love it, Matt. That's a brilliant list, and what a lovely crescendo to finish on as well. Matt in Cheshire, thank you for that. Paul says, in the light of the Supreme Court judgment, could female hospital patients forced to share a ward with a male identifying as a woman be entitled to sue the NHS? You might think so. This one from Debbie. The bin men will need police protection when they go to clear the streets. Good point. And Matt says, why doesn't the LGB community set up a new group called LGB and move away from the LGBTV+, whatever group, which would then stop all this rubbish going on? I bet LGB people don't enjoy being blamed for this current situation, which is largely why the LGB Alliance was kind of started. And when we would have, and we just had Kate on, and we've had many others over the years talk from the LGB Alliance, their point when asked, you know, why don't you, what's to do, where's the T? I said, well, that's not our discussion. There's nothing to do with us. Well, why would we stick a T on this group? We don't need a T on this group. Let people who have the T make their own arguments, form their own groups that want to make a noise or agitate or whatever they want to do. Fine, but we don't need it here. So it wasn't a case of it's not what you're against, it's what you're for. I keep saying this, and so often that gets reversed and conflated for mischievous purposes. You must be against. No, it's not. Forget what I'm against. It's what I'm for. So don't define me by any other way. I am arguing what I am pro, not what I am anti. But in this case, the argument got so muddled and foggy and so pathologically stupid in the way that the trans activists, who were so often just mad Marxist left-leaning blokes, not always trans blokes or blokes that called themselves women or blokes that just wanted to call themselves, you know, they loved identity politics. They loved this idea of mixing it up, getting away from tradition, you know, sticking a pin in the balloon of what they would see the right or the establishment, etc. That's kind of how they get out of bed in the morning, these merchants. So they did all of that stuff, and it was never a sensible argument they were trying to have. But again, corporations and companies were so scared to go against them because they thought, well, we don't want to be phobic, we don't want to be mean to anybody. But it got to a point of stupidity. So that's what happened. And there is a good argument, to go back to the point from Matt, that, you know, the T on LGBT, there's no reason for it to be there. There really is no reason for it to exist there. It's a completely different set of circumstances. It's really just power-hungry pressure groups and lobby groups who want to give a sort of credibility and a platform and a authenticity to their message by suggesting that this is the same thing. Let's bolt it on, because then we can continue with the campaign of injustice. And it simply doesn't need to be there. This one in from Michael. We were talking about stop and search and the like a little earlier, the stats, etc. I was once stopped 11 times in 1 week. I was driving a hot hatchback and it was at night, 6 times in North Wales, 5 times in England. I never did anything wrong, and the desk sergeant at my local station couldn't help but laugh at the wad of paper I handed him to produce my documentation. I'm white, I was working late, it was 40 years ago. Have things really changed that much? Says Mike. Thank you for that. 0344 499 1000. How do you brighten up the sun? Apparently scientists are working out a way to dim it or brighten it, depending on whatever they need to do. Will it be a big old button somewhere in a desert that they just press and switch? Or is there more to this science? And why do they need to monkey around with the sun? Details coming next.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Lots to get through. 25 to 4. So the government is set to approve experiments to dim sunlight in a bid to combat global warming. Scientists are exploring techniques like injecting aerosols into the atmosphere or brightening clouds to reflect sunlight. 50 million quid of funding has been allocated for these projects. Let's speak to Donica McCarthy, Director of the Climate Media Coalition. Donica, good afternoon to you. Look, I know there's a lot of strings to your bows. It's not just about monkeying around on two wheels and getting annoyed with motorists. You've now moved to opinions on sunlight. What's happened to you, Donica?
Well, I do have a background in science. I did a degree in biochemistry,
which helps. So, what is happening here? Explain the the thinking on this. How can we really change the weather, particularly the sun?
Well, some scientists believe that we have messed up the weather already so much with climate change and pumping out huge amounts of fossil fuels into the climate that we're now reaching dangerous tipping points. And they're arguing that we should experiment with these geoengineering experiments of putting aerosols such as sulfates and sea salt into the atmosphere with the idea that would reflect the sun. My view is that we shouldn't be messing around with the climate either with this experiments or with climate or with fossil fuels. We need to actually move to a clean energy economy, and actually we should stop messing around with trying to deal with the symptoms of the billionaire oil industry and actually get on with the transition.
So the transition to just a nicer life. I mean, we've decarbonised this country by 50% in the last couple of decades. We're doing rather well without having to try and mess around with nature.
Yeah, we were halfway there. We've done a huge amount in getting rid of coal, which was the most polluting thing that Britain had. We now have to deal with aviation, and home heating and transport are the main issues that we now have to focus on. My problem with a lot of these things is that the oil companies are making, I think, something like $2.7 trillion last year, and yet governments are actually asking us to pump up for carbon capture storage, which is a subsidy to the oil industry to store their pollution, and this subsidy, which again is taxpayer funding it, to actually to reflect the sun's rays to try and cool the planet down after the oil companies had heated us up. I have a real problem with that. I call it corporate socialism. I think we need to stop it. The punter, the ordinary person at home, should not be paying the cost of billionaire oil companies making huge profits. We're paying it for increased costs of food, increased home insurance, increased costs for new building, etc. And so what we should be doing, and what's the amazing thing about it is that renewable energy does not require any subsidies any longer. The International Energy Agency says that renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy now. It's cheaper than fossil fuels. And it doesn't require government funding. But so I think carbon capture storage is mad. I think geoengineering is really problematical. The problem is, if we refuse to stop burning fossil fuels, what are we going to do?
Do you believe, well, I'm assuming you do, Donica, maybe you can tell us why you believe, that quite genuinely, if once we, this net zero super dream is achieved, all over the world, say, to take it to its extreme, which could take a long, long time, that the planet will never warm again?
Well, as anybody will tell you, any scientist will tell you, the planet cools and heats naturally over millennia. The problem with fossil fuels is that we're tipping out a million years worth of stored carbon, and carbon heats up the planet. It's like throwing a duvet. One duvet is fine, 100 duvets is a nightmare on a bed. And what we're doing is we're throwing 100 duvets out every year onto the planet, heating us up. The planet will cool, it will warm no matter what humanity does. The problem is we are doing it on steroids, and we're trashing a 10,000 year stable climate, which has allowed humanity to thrive. And for the real thing it does, having a stable climate, is it allows agriculture to thrive. If you have unpredictable extreme weather and you screw up the dependable climate, you can say goodbye to a dependable agriculture, and that's what humanity depends on. We should not experiment with that. We need to stop it.
Just explain for those who like myself, who struggle with the argument. A lot of issues around this area is and passionate views that people have. Some of it is born out of, fear, naivety, a lack of information, etc. So you gave the duvet analogy, and I understand the analogy, but what is it we're doing that is making it worse at the moment, given we've got better over the years with, I mentioned the 50% reduction in issues in this country. So why is it getting worse now when we've done so many things and so many initiatives have been put in place to improve it?
Yeah, many countries, the richer countries in the West, have started transitioning our electricity systems and some of our other systems becoming more efficient, recycling, etc. However, at the same time, the developing world wanted to get the same lifestyle we have. So 10 years ago, people in China would have had a carbon footprint a tenth of ours. And that, remember, it's 1.2 billion people. That 1.2 billion people now has the same carbon footprint as us, even though we've reduced it. So the problem is that whilst we're making steps in the developed world to move towards green energy, the global, as a whole, is still increasing our fossil fuels. More people from the third world are flying, more people from the third world are eating meat, more people in the third world want better, a more richer lifestyle. The challenge is, can we enable the developing world to switch to green energy and leapfrog our dirty phase where we use loads of coal and loads of oil to get us to our sense of current riches, and actually enable them to get to cheap, clean, green energy without the intermediate phase of dirty energy. That's the challenge.
That is the challenge. Donica, thank you. Donica McCarthy, Director of the Climate Media Coalition. I wish I knew much more about the compounds and the guff and the nonsense and the chemicals and the rights and the wrongs on this one. I've never believed that we're going to die. I don't believe that we are in a position that we can't address. And we will go on having to address, because climates warm up, we have ice ages, we have times when the planet is warmer, we've had times when the south of France climate was alive and well in Middlesbrough in this country. So yeah, and it's not an area I'd love to, despite having done a gazillion debates on this, and we might even be doing one tomorrow, because I'm sure there's I think there's some embargoed climate story which I haven't fully read yet, but we'll let you know tomorrow. So yeah, Donica McCarthy, you heard what he said. That's his view. This is the stuff he follows. Is he right? Is he wrong? Brad says, this scares the heck out of me. It's working against nature rather than working to solve a problem, says Brad in Cambridge. I mean, it is what I would say. If you were going into a court of law and nobody disputes the climate changes, and also nobody disputes that we want to live in a nicer environment, and nobody disputes if there's a more efficient way of getting that energy, we should embrace it. What I think we dispute is the speed with which it is happening, the pockets and the wallets and purses that it's hitting in trying to achieve all of this, and the almost evangelical approach, the kind of death cult approach. If we don't do this, we die. The plants, the otters, the chimpanzees, the orangutans, everything dies. It won't look. And you think, well, hang on a second. Whoa, just a moment. Just a cotton picking moment. You look at what we do, how we build, how we construct, how we recycle, the kind of cars we drive. Right across the planet, this is changing. So surely this is happening anyway. Yeah, sure, one day the oil will literally run out. I think we're a good few hundred years away from that. That would suggest, I think, to most people, and if you were taking this to a court case, I think the evidence for the sceptics, let's put it like that, if nothing, would be incredibly compelling. And that's that the speed that this is happening is counterproductive. It is penalising individuals, working people, bills, taxes, God knows what are higher. I know that the cost of your energy bill is set by fossil fuels, not by wind stuff. I get the idea that if somebody says to you, stick a windmill in your back garden and a panel on your roof and you'll have free lecky for the rest of time, you'd go, yep, OK, I'll do it. It might cost you 16 grand to start with. Well, there's problem number one. You get into things like those boilers, those heat, what are they called? Heat pumps. That kind of stuff, where the jury is massively out on that one and they can't be fitted everywhere. It is the evangelical nature of the argument that makes people suspicious, and the speed with which people want to advance the argument even though change is naturally happening. See Sadiq Khan's ULEZ extension scheme for details. It's already unrecognisable in the capital city, but we just got to get that pesky 3% of motorists who are still driving dodgy cars. Let's say it's 10% for generosity's sake. So we're going to spend hundreds of millions of pounds on cameras to catch the people that won't naturally be there anyway in 3 or 4 years' time. Really? Really? I get it. Reg says, I think they need to brighten up the sun if they want solar panels to work efficiently in this country. That's what I first thought when I saw the story. Make the sun brighter, then the panels are going to work, right? Back to that issue of Englishness. It's St George's Day, 23rd of April. What is Englishness? Mark's in Carlisle. What are you thinking? Mark, afternoon to you.
Happy St George's Day. Just before I start,
yes.
I probably broke my big toe because of that lawyer, the tussle you had with that lawyer. I tried to kick a cushion and I kicked my pool table.
Ah, classic. No, never kick the pool table. It will only end in disaster.
Well, the way he was spouting out, unbelievable. Like that. Anyways, I want to call today, St George's Day, for all our police forces to use our correct flag on their uniforms. My father was a policeman for 30 years, my sister was for 20. Come on. It's ended. That started all the woke sort of policing with this non-offending flag, diluting of the George Cross, etc. So I call people to start wearing the correct flag.
What do they mostly wear? Do they not wear a Union flag?
No, they don't. You know they don't. They wear a black one with a blue line through it.
But that's about the police, isn't it? The thin blue line.
Oh, come on. Well, there's a conspiracy about that. Anyways...
yes, some people are very offended by it as well.
Yeah, can I just read you something, right?
Yeah.
Can I read you something?
Go for it, Mark.
This is the Oxford Dictionary version of hypocritical.
What you mean?
Behaving in a way...
Hang on. Before you start, Mark. So just to hang on, Mark.
Sorry,
Mark,
I haven't put my glasses on.
I'm glad. Can I just stop you for a second, just to clarify, because I didn't quite hear what you said. Mark.
In a way that doesn't match the moral standards of opinions you claim to have, especially.
Mark, I'm going to get you to do this again, Mark.
The way you believe.
Okay, listen.
This definition highlights the discrepancy between.
I don't know why he can't hear me, but something's happened to the phone system. But it's an interesting little experiment.
Stated values.
It's almost like you've got a cross phone line. Can you hear me, Mark?
Yes, I can, yeah.
OK, no, we didn't hear any of what you just said. I was trying to stop you because we didn't hear what you said to the beginning to introduce it. The dictionary definition of, did you say hypocritical?
The Oxford Dictionary definition of hypocritical. Let me read it.
Right, go.
Hypocritical. Behaving in a way that doesn't match the moral standards of opinions that you claim to have. Essentially, it's acting in a way that contradicts the way you believe, say or believe. The definition highlights the discrepancy between one's words and actions, implying a lack of sincerity, genuine belief in one's stated values. Does that remind you of somebody?
Reminds me of lots of people. One in particular? Go on, pick one. I was about to say, pick Keir Starmer, because he's the head honcho, isn't he?
Oh, God. And it isn't because he tried to jail me 7 times when he was DPP. I've got over it. I won the trials and everything. It's not personal, but come on.
There you go. Well, I'm glad you're not wrong about that. I'm glad you're out and free as a bird, as was once said. Mark, thank you very much. Mark in Carlisle, great call when we got there. 0344 499 1000. Gary says, if oil companies are making an absolute fortune, can your guest please explain why BP's share price is lower in actual terms and considerably lower in real terms than it was 20 years ago? The truth is that oil companies are huge businesses with hundreds of billions of dollars tied up in capital. That's why they make big profits. But after the government has taken their share in corporation tax, windfall taxes, there is precious little left for the investor. Yeah, we always get the headline figure, don't we? Not the figure that they end up with, which I know is squillions of pounds compared to what most of us have, but I think the point's made. Gary, thank you. 0344 499 1000.
Keir Starmer hates talking about this topic.
Yeah.
He only ever speaks about it when absolutely forced to. And in the past, even then, he's just avoided the question altogether. So I think the reason that we're not seeing him come out really strongly against these protests with some really disgusting, violent, misogynistic placards is because he just wants to move on. He's said, okay, fine, I concede, a woman can't have a willy. I don't want to talk about this anymore.
Yeah.
I think that is what we're seeing, and that's why he's not coming out stronger.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Leeds says Keir Starmer isn't the best at PMQs, but today he was on the ropes with Kemi coming out swinging and connecting every verbal blow. He looks like a person beaten after 5 long years in office and a government falling apart, throwing pre-scripted air shots at the Tories and reform. Smacks of desperation and lack of awareness, but after 10 long months, this is the start of the end for them, says Glenn. It's going to be really interesting as it gets towards the next election, what happens with Reform and the Conservatives. Something will happen, OK? Both deny that. Both say, no, we're not making a pact. Something will happen. There is a chance it may well just be a case of standing down candidates in certain constituencies so that they can make way for the other one if they're more likely to win, so you don't dilute the right-wing vote. Could be that. Because in all probability, despite those polls looking really good for Reform, in all probability, it would be really hard to overturn Labour's thumping majority. But they could do it with two parties sort of singing from a similar hymn sheet. Andrew is in Halifax. Back to that Englishness, Andrew. What have you got for us? Hi.
Hello, Ian. Well, I actually rather agree with you more than some of the callers. I mean, I am English, but I also fully accept your premise that the most important identity to me is British, and I think that there should be more done to promote a collective identity, because this is a thing. And I've discussed this with you before and other talk presenters. One of the things that a lot of people don't realise is that outside of the obvious example of Ukraine and Cyprus, the United Kingdom is under more constitutional assault than any country in Europe. That is the truth of it.
What do you put that from who, Andrew? Where is your finger pointing?
Well, I point to the SNP, and I point to the likes of Sinn Féin and the SDLP in Northern Ireland.
Okay.
I mean, these are parties that are absolutely, relentless in their quest to destroy this country.
Yeah.
And I really do think it is a shame that we don't copy most other countries, Germany and Spain being two examples, and have a constitution that expressly forbids secession, because as I say, it is relentless.
Maybe that is the answer, but I think that certainly the Scottish question was largely solved by the SNP going slightly down the pan of late, and Labour, love 'em or hate 'em, being a very pro-union party, but not willing to take on some of the arguments they were putting forward. Final one, Becky says, I'm very proud of being English. I love the fact that I live in Sherwood Forest. It's the government I don't like. Jezza.
How are you?
Good.
She wouldn't if she knew that the local NHS, I've just done this on Plank of the Week, the local NHS trust in Sherwood Forest has got a wheel of misfortune, which is have you not heard about this?
No.
It's how you're categorised. If you're white, middle class, you're privileged, and if you come from another country...
that was...
Yes, it's actually Sherwood Forest, which is actually based in the town Newark. in Nottingham. Did you know that? The headquarters of Sherwood NHS Trust is Newark.
Yes, because I used to know...
Newark is the only town in England that's an anagram of, and I'm not allowed to do that. Work it out for yourself.
Newark. Hang on, I'm going to write this down.
N-E-W-A-R-K.
Oh, yes.
Hey, there you go.
Yeah, that's good. Patrick Mercer used to be the Conservative MP there years ago.
Yes, he did.
You may remember him, and now I think it's Labour, but because they...
Robbing from the poor to give to the rich. Anyway, interesting. We spent the entire day yesterday talking about... Well, we were slightly... Obviously, you know, a woman can't have a penis, so we asked what a man is.
You see, I like that question. I met you earlier in the makeup room.
You did,
before the show.
We were getting ready.
We were in there getting prepped. You were in there a long time before you're on air.
Listen, I'm 60.
Is that what it is?
Yes, and I had 2 television shows to do before.
And they had some polyfiller there.
They had some polyfiller. It was just to dry and then be streamed off.
But I like the chiselled.
Yes.
I like the question. What is a man?
Yeah. What is a man in your mind?
What is a man? You see, I think
What has he got? If not himself, then he has not.
What's the next line?
I've no idea. I did it my way. Yeah, it was interesting yesterday because it's common sense. Today was very interesting as well in the House of Commons in Prime Minister's Question Time. I mean, I would have been offended if Kemi Badenoch had said it to me because I've only got 1 testicle, but she actually...
Why have you never mentioned this?
Well, because cancer's not funny. Sir Keir Starmer was accused of not having the balls by Kemi Badenoch today as the Tory leader launched a scathing attack. I'm beginning to feel sorry for her. On the day she finally grew a pair and took him on, Jenrick's outside going, I think we should unite with Reform and do her. That's the only way we can beat the Labour Party.
But the thing is, she must... Because she's... You know, based on the polling, it's not looking great for her.
No.
But I don't know whether Jenrick is the answer either, because I think he speaks the language of people on the right. But if
or does he speak the language of people in the United Kingdom who are fed up with the flip-flopping uniparty politics?
You know when you need a politician who's got the X factor?
Yeah.
And I don't sense he has that either.
No, and of course Nigel has that, but is he a person, Nigel Farage, that can work with other people? Richard Tice is the next chance at the Exchequer. I've seen his money clip. It'd be great.
You've seen his money clip?
He's got a money clip. Did you know that?
No, I mean, I've broken bread with Tice on many occasions.
Yes, you have.
He's never shown me his money clip.
And you've broken bread with Mrs. Kyle as well. Also, Keir's getting it today from me. He's issued a St George's Day... Yes, thank you, yes. Bing bong. St George's Day rallying cry. We should support the flag. That's from him, the hypocritical man.
It's almost as if there's an election around the corner.
Yes.
And he needs to convince people that he's very patriotic indeed.
But he isn't. I told a story yesterday where my father-in-law lives. I won't name it. The council is Labour-run, and the rumour was that if you flew a St George's flag today, and he put one in his garden this morning, you could be visited by the police under the auspices of committing a hate crime.
No.
If that happens, I'm going to have him on. It's an outrage. Why are the Scots and the Irish and the Welsh allowed to... What are the Welsh allowed to flag?